It all started with my grandfather. He built this park at a time when the ride still attracted crowds, gilded carousels, roller coasters creaking in the wind, a giant Ferris wheel that could be seen for dozens of miles on clear days. As a child, I listened to his stories about how he personally checked every bolt, every weld point, and how he spent the night in his office under an old poster with a clown mascot smiling too broadly, too unnaturally. "The park is not a place for fear," he repeated, adjusting his glasses. But on the day of his funeral, my mother told me something she had been silent about for years. The body was found on the tracks of the Terrible Express, the very ghost train that he had designed himself. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, his fingers were cut off, as if someone was collecting souvenirs. My father inherited the park, but instead of restoring it, he turned it into an obsession. The walls of our living room were covered with drawings, photographs of empty alleys, and surveillance footage with silhouettes flashing in the background. Or shadows. He kept saying that there was something left, but his mother forbade him to talk about it in front of me. Until one day he disappeared. He didn't leave, he just disappeared. In his office, they found a broken monitor, a puddle of blood on the keyboard, and a note written in his handwriting, but in words he would never use: "They don't like the light." I returned to the park after 10 years. Not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. Bankers, collectors, urban myths, everyone wanted this land. But as soon as I stepped through the rusty gate with the inscription, "Fun awaits," I realized that the park would not let me go. The air was thick as syrup, saturated with the smell of rotting wood and metal, which had long forgotten what pain was. It also has a sweet, almost candy flavor. Like when I was a kid, when my grandfather used to give me lollipops from the kiosk at the entrance, the first thing I found was his office. The door was hanging on one hinge, and chaos reigned inside. Papers with diagnoses of technical wear over 20 years, folders with reports of minor incidents, missing visitors, broken cameras, noise in the tunnels, and an audio cassette. There is a crooked marker on it: "Do not turn on when they are there." I inserted the tape into an old player with the lid torn off. First there was the noise, then his father's voice, trembling, as if he were speaking with his hand over his mouth. "If you're hearing this, they're already here. Don't look in mirrors. Don't go into the tunnels after sunset. And for God's sake, don't believe the writing on the walls. They laugh when you read them." I tried to seal it up, but they're bursting through the cracks. They're not human. They don't even. The recording stopped. In the silence, I heard a creak, not from the tape. Outside. Slow, rhythmic, as if something was dragging on the concrete of the alley. My heart sank into my chair as the sound approached the door, and passed by. Through the crack in the jamb, I saw only a shadow cast on the opposite wall, something low, hunched, with unnaturally long arms that touched the floor. But that's not possible. There is no mysticism, I reminded myself. Only reality. I spent the next few hours searching for something that would explain my father's madness. And I found it, under the floorboard, in a metal box filled with wax. Grandfather's diary. August 21st. The inspectors are asking again about the noise in the tunnels. They say children complain about the voices from the speakers. I turned off all sound systems, but I heard it myself today. It's like someone is whispering behind my back, repeating my thoughts. I checked the underground utilities, but they were empty. But the air, it's thick. It's like being in a morgue. September 3rd. The workers refuse to go down to the boiler room. Someone is spreading rumors about humanoids in the tunnels. I fired 2 people for panicking. "You'll have to do it yourself." Then the pages were torn out. I went outside, holding a lantern in my hand. The sun was setting, turning the rusty slides blood red. And then I saw them, the inscriptions. Not graffiti, not children's doodles. Neat, white-painted letters on the walls, benches, even on the Ferris wheel. "We're having fun at your expense. Your grandfather is crying in the chimney. Why don't you play with us?" And the scariest thing is on the carousel door. "He's here." Is he the father? Grandfather? I pushed the door open. It smelled musty and sour, like spoiled milk. The carousel, once sparkling with lights, was now a skeleton, peeling horses with gouged eyes, chariots with cracked wheels. And a figure. Sitting on a throne in the center. A man? A mannequin? I got closer. The lantern picked out a face from the darkness. My father. No, not really. His skin was waxy, his eyes were closed, but his mouth was stretched into a smile, too wide, like that clown from his grandfather's poster. There's a wound on his neck, neat as a surgical incision. And in his hands, a note. They like us better when we are silent. The lock clicked behind him. The door slammed shut. Somewhere in the mechanism of the carousel, gears creaked, and I realized, she began to spin. The carousel was gaining momentum. Horses with twisted necks flashed in the lamplight, their shadows beating against the walls like whips. I grabbed onto an iron pole, trying not to lose my balance. The wax figure of his father swayed in time with the movement. His smile now seemed like a mockery. It's a mechanism, I whispered to myself, feeling the floor give out from under my feet. But rationality was shattered by sound. Somewhere under my feet, in the belly of the carousel, chains were grinding, as if they were being pulled by dozens of hands. I crouched down, shining the light through the gap between the platforms. Metal gears covered with rusty slime were spinning at an unnatural speed. And there are strips of cloth between them. Blue, with small polka dots. Like a grandfather clown's jumpsuit. A sharp jolt and the carousel stopped. The door swung open with a long creak. I ran out, tripping over the broken glass, and almost bumped into him. Candy kiosk. The one from childhood. The windows were broken, but there was a box inside, on a dusty shelf. The same one that my grandfather showed me, for the bravest. My hand was shaking when I lifted the lid. Tape. 8mm, with the inscription, Technical Inspection. 1983 inch. I found a projector in the corner of the administration building. Dust flew into the air when I inserted the film. Footage flashed on the wall, a grandfather in overalls checking seat belts on a terrible express train. The camera flickered, and the focus shifted to the tunnel behind him. And there, movement. Not a shadow, but a man. He was tall, in a work uniform, and his face was hidden by a cap. He was walking behind his grandfather, holding something long and narrow in his hand. A tire iron, I breathed. Grandfather turned around. There was no fear in his eyes, only rage. He rushed at the man, and they disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. The camera dropped and the recording was interrupted. I ran to the terrible express. The carriages, once bright red, now looked like rusted coffins. The rails led into the black mouth of the tunnel, from where the smell of wet sand and a copper coin wafted. Blood. The flashlight picked out a sign from the darkness, service area. Unauthorized entry is prohibited. The door in the wall was ajar. Inside there is a staircase down. Each step creaked in a new way, as if it were a warning, come back. An underground corridor, paneled in the 70s, led to a door marked, Directorate. Inside is a table littered with engineering diagrams and a massive safe. The code? I tried my grandfather's date of birth, 19-13-45. A click. Inside was a folder labeled, Incidents. The first photo shows a worker with a crushed skull. Caption, Accident at the roller coaster installation. September 12, 1967. The second, a woman in a floral print dress, entangled in the wires of a Ferris wheel. Suicide. 03.07.1971. Third. The third was torn out. But on the back is a pencil sketch, a plan of the park with notes. Crosses near amusement rides, underground utilities, and manholes. And the caption, he's still choosing places. A crash from above startled me. Someone was walking in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, ragged breathing. I slammed the safe shut and put out the flashlight. You shouldn't have found this, the voice is broken, as if the speaker hasn't used it in a long time. A silhouette squeezed into the doorway. Tall, hunched over, in a robe, as on film. There's a tire iron in my hand. A grandfather. Killed your friend? I asked, backing up against the wall. Are you taking revenge on your family? He laughed. The sound is like a braking mechanism. Your grandfather, he corrected us. Those who ruined his perfect park. The man stepped into the lamplight. His face was covered with scars, as if the skin had been sewn from rags. But I survived. I've become a better person. Stronger. He swung the tire iron. I ducked under the table, feeling the steel fly inches from my head. He grabbed the first thing he could find, a fire axe from the wall. You're just a human being. I shouted. You. The impact of the tire iron hit the wall, showering me with shards of panels. I rushed to the exit, but he blocked the way. His eyes, one was cloudy white, the other unnaturally blue. Like the clown on the posters. He implanted a glass eye in me, the man hissed. He told me to keep order. Now I see all the liars. The hatchet in my hand was shaking. Somewhere above, in the park, the wind howled, the hatchet smashed into the wooden panel as he lunged at me. I jumped to the side, feeling the tire iron scrape my shoulder. The pain shot through like a bite of acid, but the adrenaline drowned it out. His breathing is hoarse, with a gurgle, as if his lungs are filled with dirt. He called us marriage, he hissed, brandishing the instrument. Dumped it down the drains like garbage. But I've learned how to repair. I darted for the stairs, but he intercepted me, cutting off my way to the exit. The light of the lantern picked out a wall covered with photographs. Dozens of pictures, a grandfather in a helmet, workers, children, and red crosses over their faces. Everyone who disappeared. "You're a collector," I gasped, pressing my back against the cold pipes. He laughed, picking up the tire iron. "The archivist. I keep the truth. Your grandfather was rotten. He killed for typos in reports, for broken nuts." The glass I flashed. "Your father understood. He tried to seal up the tunnels. Had to convince him otherwise." My thoughts were racing. The air smelled of iron and mold. Water dripped somewhere, rhythmically, like the ticking of a clock. "You killed him. And my grandfather. Trained," he corrected. "My grandfather taught me pain. I taught him to fly." From the pocket of his robe, he pulled out a bunch of keys, old and rusty. The ones that hung in my father's office. "A choice, boy. Join the archive." He pointed the keys in my direction, or become the next exhibit. I yanked on the fire hose hanging on the wall. The water gushed out under pressure, hitting his face. He growled, covering himself with his hands, and I crawled under his arm, scraping my knees on the concrete. The stairs seemed endless. Behind him, there were footsteps, swearing, and the sound of a falling instrument. I burst into the hall of the terrible express, stumbling over the rails. Wagons. "We need to hide." Jumped into the last car. He froze, pressing his palm to his mouth. His footsteps slowed at the entrance of the tunnel. "Do you think you're the first one hiding here?" The voice echoed through the vaults. "Your dad, oh," he howled like a puppy when I put a wrench down his throat. "I told you you'd come." I felt in my pocket for a box of matches. Survivors of falls, rain, and fear. My gaze fell on the sign above the door, "Fire Danger Zone." Flammable materials. A piece of glass. There is a canister in the corner of the car. I shook it, and the smell of gasoline penetrated the rust. His shadow fell on the carriage. "Come out, or I'll set this train on fire." "Try it," I whispered, pouring gasoline on the floor. He appeared in the doorway, a tire iron at the ready. A match struck a box. The flame burst into a blue vortex, licking his robe. He screamed, inhumanly, like a cutting machine, and rolled across the floor, trying to beat out the fire. I jumped out of the carriage, feeling the heat searing my heels. I ran through the park, not understanding the path. The firelight danced behind him, casting orange reflections on the carousel with the wax father. The stench of burnt leather and plastic filled the air. At the main gate, I turned around. He was standing in the middle of the alley, engulfed in flames, but I didn't fall. The hand with the tire iron slowly rose, pointing at me. "Archive? It's not lit." His voice mingled with the crackle of the fire. I ran out the gate. For the first time in many hours, fresh air, stars, silence. But there was a find burning in his pocket, the key from the maniac's bunch, with the tag, Vault 9. Sirens in the distance. Someone called the fire department. But I knew that by morning the park would be ashes. Sirens were wailing somewhere over the hill, but I was running in the opposite direction, toward the old freeway where the amusement trucks used to park. The key burned in his pocket like a piece of hot coal. Storage 9. I remembered my grandfather's drawings. There should be a bunker at the edge of the park, beyond the lake with rotting swan boats. For storing documents, he said. Or for something else. The wind carried ash and the screams of firefighters. I crept along the fence, clinging to the barbed wire. His hands were shaking, and his chest was pounding as if his heart was trying to escape through his ribs. The lake turned out to be a swamp covered with a green film. The boats, once white, now resembled skeletons emerging from the mud. The bunker looked like a concrete tooth embedded in the ground. A rusty door with a combination lock. The key fitted. Inside there is darkness and the smell of old paper mixed with chemicals. The flashlight picked out shelves with folders, boxes with cassettes, and in the middle, cell. Not a dog's. It's human. The bars are as thick as an arm. Inside there is a mattress covered with mold, a bowl with dried food. There are scratches on the wall. At first I thought it was a scribble, but I looked closer. A calendar. Dashes, 7 in a row. Months. Years. Who was sitting here? I whispered, but the answer came right away. There was a notebook on the bottom shelf. The first page. Day 1. He said that I would become part of the archive, that no one will notice. The handwriting changed from page to page, at first smooth, then trembling, like an old man's. Day 34. He brings me pictures. He says this is my new family. Day 112. I forgot my name. He calls me Doctor. And the last entry. Day 478. He was mistaken. I'm not going to die. I'll get out. And I will find his child. The child? Me? The crunch of gravel outside made me turn around. The shadow froze at the entrance, not his, no. A female figure, thin, in a torn dress. Her hair is tangled, and her face is hidden in the dark. You! Are you from the archive? She stepped forward, her voice hoarse, as if from a long silence. I retreated to the shelves, clutching the flashlight like a club. Who are you? He called me a doll. She raised her hand, and the light picked out the scars on her wrists. Deep, parallel lines. He said that I should laugh for the guests. But I ran away, when he was preparing you. Me? She nodded as she approached. Her eyes were too bright, as if in a fever. Your father tried to warn you. That's why the maniac killed him. You're next. You're the perfect heir. The words were confusing in my head. Photos from the safe, the cage, this bunker. Why are you here? She touched the cage. He'll be back. It always comes back. The siren stopped. The silence became thicker, denser. And in it, the creaking of footsteps. Heavy, dragging. She shuddered, whispered, "He's here," and ducked into the shadows between the shelves. The bunker door creaked, the door swung open. He stood in the doorway, burned, his skin hanging in patches, but the tire iron was still clutched in his hand. The glass eye reflected the light of the lantern like a distress signal. Archive, he croaked, stepping inside. The doll seemed to have disappeared into the darkness. I retreated to the cage until my back was against the bars. You wanted to make me a part of it? I shouted, clutching the key until it hurt in my palm. Like a father? How's Grandpa? He laughed, spitting out bloody saliva. You're already a part of it. Your blood, in the concrete of the park. With a sudden movement, I threw the flashlight in his face. The glass shattered, the light went out. In the dark, I ducked under his arm, feeling the tire iron scratch my back. I ran outside, but he was faster. He grabbed my hair and pulled me to him. Look! He turned my head toward the lake. There was a body floating in the murky water. Women in torn dresses. Dolls. Her face, white as chalk, looked up at the sky. She ran away. But she came back. Everyone is coming back. I bit his arm, sank my teeth into the burned flesh. He roared and let go. I ran to the lake without thinking. I jumped into the green muck. The cold burned my skin, and the mud tightened, but I swam, gasping for the stinking air. His screams subsided. When I got to the opposite shore, I saw him standing by the water, holding his burned cheek. You're like them. His voice cracked. Police cars entered the park. Sirens, screams. He darted into the thicket like an animal, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. When I first heard about this place, I chuckled. The name seemed like another cry of desperation from the producers of a cheap trash show, trying to squeeze at least some horror out of the dead air. Paranormal highlights, inside Old South Pittsburgh Hospital, sounded like background noise on a half-asleep evening. I've never taken mysticism seriously, but money is. The money was real. I worked as a cameraman for a small film crew that traveled through old buildings, abandoned buildings, unfinished facilities, and prominent locations for so-called paranormal investigations. We were hired by local channels, sometimes YouTube shows, sometimes just private companies who had too much free time and even more ambitions. And we gave them what they wanted: dust, creaks, slow-motion footage, and a little fright on the presenter's face. The rest is a matter of editing and sounds. But this project was different. Firstly, we were offered a fee 3 times higher than usual. Secondly, the customer was not a private entrepreneur, but a large production company working on a documentary series for a streaming service. And, thirdly, the location was not chosen by chance. According to locals, people often disappeared there. But the police reports did not mention this, either openly or between the lines. Officially, the building had been abandoned for a long time. An old brick building with a faded South Pittsburgh Hospital sign at the entrance. Since it closed, ostensibly for financial reasons, no one has been allowed in, except for rare researchers and local historians. But when we got there, the gates were open. Not open from time to time, not broken down, but neatly opened, as if someone was waiting for us. Ray, an operator with 10 years of experience, I've never worried about empty buildings. He could stand in complete darkness with a camera and calmly smoke while someone played a scared facial expression in front of the lens. But then, when we first went inside, I felt something different. Not fear. It's just a feeling of very bad silence. There was no sound of wind. There was no creaking underfoot. No accidental popping or dripping water. Complete, sustained, strained silence, as if the room was hermetically sealed and alive. There were 4 of us, me, Tom, the presenter, Laura, the sound assistant, and the location manager, some new guy, Jay, with a trendy beard and a tattoo on his neck. He was responsible for the paperwork, permits, insurance, schedules, and what we call everything to keep us from getting arrested. Tom was delighted. He liked to build a mystical show out of each location. Even when we were filming an old grain elevator in Arizona, he found something to whisper to the camera. Someone may have died here, the spirit is felt, the place remembers. Everything was for the frame. I turned left, passing by the remains of a broken hospital bed that stood against the wall as if someone had just gotten out of it. The floor creaked under my feet, as if the building itself was trying to tell me something, but I didn't pay attention to it. I had my own reasons for being here. I didn't believe in ghosts. Everything I had heard about the old South Pittsburgh hospital, I considered to be stories told by tired nurses or teenagers who sneaked in here at night. But even rationality has its limits. When I started recording a podcast about forgotten places, I wanted real stories. Criminal, ugly, heavy. I wasn't looking for ghosts, I was looking for the truth. The old hospital was perfect. I found a few people who worked here in recent years before the closure. One of them, an elderly man with hands covered with old burns, told me without looking into my eyes, "If you come in, don't look back. Whatever's left inside is none of your business anymore." Then I laughed. Now, I remembered those words all too clearly. My equipment, microphone, voice recorder, camera, recorded my every move. I wasn't alone. Joe was with me, my friend and cameraman, with whom we did all the outings. Only he lingered outside, fiddled with the wiring, and didn't manage to get in right away. I went ahead to start shooting earlier. It was a mistake. I came across a staircase down, a technical underground room. The metal railing was sticky with rust and something else that I didn't want to touch. There was no light below the building. Only my headlamp, narrow as a needle, cut through the darkness. The camera on his shoulder was recording everything. It smelled of mold and something else. I can't describe it. It's like someone poured a bucket of blood on the floor and left it for several years. I could hear drops falling somewhere deep in the corridor, and dull clicks, as if glass was being dropped on tiles. I moved on. There were strange footprints on the wall. Not inscriptions, not drawings, but scratches. Not chaotic, but smooth, running along the wall, as if someone had run a sharp metal object along it, walking very slowly and without taking their hands off. Some of the scratches were covered with dried mud, but one, closer to the floor, looked fresh. I crouched down to examine it, and noticed that underneath it was a tuft of human hair stuck to the gap between the tiles. I stood up and exhaled slowly. Rationality was cracking. It could be anything: homeless people, teenagers, someone joking. I walked on, but the cold was already beginning to unfold inside. An open door on the left led to the former morgue. The gurneys were in place. Several drawers, sliding body cameras, remained half open. I noticed one that was fully extended, and it had a dent in it. It was as if someone was kicking from the inside, trying to get out. I came closer. He recorded a comment on a dictaphone, most likely damage from displacement, but it looks creepy. And then the light flickered. Just for a split second. Then it turned on again. I stood there, not moving, and realized that I could hear breathing. Deep, frequent, somewhere on the right. But when I turned around abruptly, there was no one there. Just the old hospital door, ajar. It was damp. I took a few steps back. My breathing quickened. Rationality was dying slowly. There was a creak behind me. Joe finally went inside. I turned around, but all I saw was an empty hallway. More footsteps, now behind me. I turn around, no one. The basement seemed to mock me. Turning off the camera, I took out my phone. No signal, no internet connection. I knew that concrete could jam the signal, especially in basements, but I didn't like this coincidence. I called Joe again. Loudly. No sound in response. I got out of the basement, went up the stairs and found myself in the hallway. I knew that if I didn't find Joe now, I'd have to call for help. But here's the strange thing. His flashlight was lying on the floor, right in the middle of the corridor. Enabled. He just lay there. I got closer and noticed that there was a card next to it. A pass. An old, battered badge. There's a name on it that wasn't on the staff lists I studied. Someone else's name. And the date. But not the date when the hospital was open, but yesterday. Someone came in here yesterday. Or, I felt something cold envelop me, but not from the outside, but from the inside. Not fear. Helplessness. Everything that I had planned has collapsed. I didn't know what to do. Raise the lantern? Search further? Leave? But Joe. I turned to go back, and I heard a voice. Very clearly. He said my name. I froze. The voice sounded like it was standing just a few meters away. I slowly looked around, but the hallway was empty. Not darkness, not some strange silhouettes, just emptiness, bathed in the cold light of my flashlight. I started walking, not knowing why or where to go. I was just walking. I crossed another flight of stairs and found myself in the surgical ward. The doors to the operating rooms were ajar. There is dried sticky dirt on the floor, stains left, probably from a long-standing pipe break or bay. I tried not to look down. Every step echoed in the empty rooms, where once, perhaps, people died not from diseases, but from negligence, mistakes, and neglect. I was beginning to realize that everything that had happened here wasn't supernatural. It was mundane and scary in a human way. I pushed open the door to one of the operating rooms and turned on the camera. The lighting was dim, but enough to see the table, still fixed in the middle of the room. Metal, covered with rust and a touch of time. There was a broken lamp on the wall, and a piece of tile had been knocked out above it. I imagined how someone was hysterically struggling, kicking the walls, hitting the lamp. Slowly, everything that was happening was filled with sensation, too much real fear. Not imposed, not invented. It was like déjà vu from someone else's pain. I saw another object on the floor, a cassette recorder. An old, battered one lay at the foot of the table. I picked it up. There was a cassette inside. I clicked on play. First, the noise. Then, a voice. Female. Tired. Quiet, with pauses between words, as if she finds it difficult to speak. My name is Dr. Allison Bird. Today, I'm alone again. Patient 03-07. Lost consciousness, the injection was incorrect. I asked you not to touch her, but no one listened. I need to get out of here. Today. The recording stopped. Not because the tape ran out, but because someone pressed stop. I stood in silence. He was breathing heavily. It wasn't a game. Some of the staff stayed here after closing. Or he came here to, hell knows what. But one thing is clear, there were real people here who had real tragedies. And for some reason, all this was hushed up. They didn't put it in the reports, they didn't tell the press. Someone covered everything up. I went further into the department, into what used to be called post-treatment. According to legend, patients who could not pay for treatment were kept there. They could just be left behind. No care, no medicine. I didn't know how true that was, but the atmosphere in that wing was different. The air was heavier, the ceiling was lower, the windows were boarded up from the inside. In one of the wards, I found beds that had been torn apart, and children's toys piled in a corner. And on the wall is an inscription scratched with a nail. I saw them close the doors and leave. I stayed here. Alone. There was no signature. I almost didn't notice when I started hearing footsteps again. At first, they were deaf, in the distance. Then closer. I thought it might be Joe, but he didn't respond. I shouted, nothing. He picked up the recorder and turned on the recording. I wanted to leave the evidence, even if I didn't get out of here right away. 8:43 p.m., I said out loud, I'm alone. The doctor's record confirms that the staff worked under pressure. There may be cases of violence. Presumably, there were people here who remained locked up after the official closure. And then the footsteps stopped. Very close. I turned around abruptly, and it was empty. Unable to stay in this part of the building any longer, I moved back to the stairs. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my throat was dry. When I got to the main hall, it was quiet. It's too quiet. The light from my flashlight picked out only the dust in the air. And then I heard his voice. Max. It was Joe. Without a doubt. He called me from the right wing, from the reception area. I went there quickly, almost running. But when I ran into the hallway, it was empty. Only my voice, reflected off the walls, reminded me how alone I was. And that's when I saw him, his backpack lying against the wall. Open. All his equipment is inside. And a piece of paper. I took it out, my hands were shaking. It was written in his handwriting, "I came down for you. I heard your voice. I think you called me. But there was someone there. Very quiet. I'm going to check if it's someone left in the building. Wait upstairs." But I didn't call him. Not once. Rationality broke down completely. I sat on the floor, right against the wall, and just breathed. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Not ghosts. Not fiction. Someone was here. Someone who was watching. Who knew how fear worked. And if I didn't find Joe soon, I didn't know who exactly I would have to look for, a friend, or someone's victim. I squeezed the paper in my fist and stood up. If he went looking for someone, I'll do the same. He couldn't just disappear. I walked along the corridor, silently now, and every step felt like I was pushing myself forward. To the right was a long hallway littered with trash and broken chairs from the reception area. The door with the curved glass is ajar. I turned the light of the flashlight there. It ran across the dirty floor, stopped at the bloodstain. It wasn't dried up, it was fresh. My heart skipped a beat. I walked in slowly. There was a girl sitting on the floor in the corner. She was thin, in some kind of stretched-out hospital pajamas. Her hands were pressed to her chest, and her chin was trembling. Her hair was long and matted, and her face was dirty and bruised. She stared at me without blinking, as if she didn't understand that I was real. "Hey," I said, holding up my hands. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. How did you get here?" She shook her head slightly. Then she whispered, "He locked me up. He told me not to scream. I said that if I kept quiet, he would come back, but he never came back." I knelt down next to her and pulled out a flask of water. She didn't take it right away, her hands were shaking. I saw the marks on her wrists, rough, like from a tourniquet or a strong rope. "There's a bruise on his neck." She drank for a long time, then asked, "And Joe, is he with you?" "Yes, I was. But now I do not know. He left me a note. He said he followed me. I think he heard you. Or I thought I heard it." Her eyes widened, and her breathing became harsh. "He knew how to fake other people's voices," she said softly. "He knew how to get people to go where he wanted them to go. He did it with others." I froze. The words stuck in my throat. Not a single sound. I just looked at her. Then he said, "Who?" She didn't answer right away. She just ran her trembling fingers along her neck and whispered, "The one who still lives here. Does not work. Not a watchman." I just stayed. "He doesn't want anyone to come here. But when they come, he plays with them." I squatted down. My head was spinning. It wasn't something supernatural. It was someone who used to work here, lived nearby, or, God knows, someone who stayed after closing was hiding. Maybe his roof was blown off. Perhaps he had seen death too closely and too often. He knew the layout of the building. He knew how to use it, how to lure it. And, judging by the words of this girl, it was not the first time he had done this. I helped her up. She was staggering. I put my shoulder under him and led him out into the corridor. We walked slowly, but I knew that every second counted now. I didn't know where Joe was. But if this person saw him, it could have ended pretty damn badly. "What's your name?" I asked as we made our way past the ruined doors. "Haley," she replied, almost inaudibly. "I came here with a group 6 months ago. They said there would be content. Only, no one came back after the night. I thought they'd find me. But no one was looking. 6 months. And no one found it. This meant that someone was carefully covering their tracks. Or he just chose those whom no one would be looking for. Content users, singles, and students who are passionate about hunting for adrenaline." We turned down the stairs. And then I heard Joe's voice. Clearly. On the second floor level. "Max. I'm here." I gripped the railing. Haley pressed herself against me. "Don't go," she whispered. "It's not him." But I knew Joe's voice. Too good to confuse. "Joe, answer me. Where are you?" "Here. At the basement. I found a way out through the technical descent." I looked at Haley. She shook her head again. There was no fear or doubt in her eyes. Just an exhausted, burnt-out understanding of what's going on. "He knows your voice. He knows what you call your friends. He spoke in your voice when he called mine." I staggered. There are too many coincidences. Too many repetitions. Everything that I thought was rational suddenly became dangerous. He, whoever he is not a fiction. He's not supernatural. Just a man. But that's what made him scary. He knew how to cheat. And he knew what he was doing. I took a knife out of my backpack. Small, collapsible, for insurance. I handed it to Haley. We turned around and walked to the service exit. An old staircase led down to the archive room. I remembered, it faced the back of the building. Maybe we can get out there. When we got down, we came across an iron door. It's closed. Next to it is a nailer, rusty but heavy. I started knocking out the lock. At that moment, there are footsteps upstairs again. Fast ones. Strangers. I didn't turn around. He just beat me. Once. Second. Then there was a click, and the door gave way. We ran into the corridor of the archive. Shelves were knocked down, papers scattered on the floor, and there were footprints among them. Men's shoes. Fresh ones. There was a faint light ahead. Perhaps a hatch or ventilation. I pushed Haley forward and looked around. Someone was coming down the stairs. We sped up. And when I opened the last door leading to the technical manhole, I saw blood on the wall on the left. Fresh. And a note. Written on a piece of paper from my own notebook. I froze, holding the paper in my hand. There was a buzz in my head, not from fear, but from how personal everything had become. It was no longer just a walk through an abandoned place. It turned into a hunt. It was only now that I realized for sure that the hunt was on for me. Haley was standing behind me, breathing heavily. I slowly put the note in my pocket, but didn't show it to her. What for? She's already been through more than words can explain. His hand was shaking. Not from panic, but from inner rage. Someone decided that they could just cross people out. Play with them. Hide them and break them. I looked at Haley, and her face was pale, but something flickered in her eyes as I took a step closer. She didn't pull away. I took her hand, which was thin and fragile. And at that moment, I realized that I wasn't just saving her. I held on to her the same way she held on to me. We were both on edge. She's after months of isolation and pain. I did it because I no longer believed in control. I was just doing my best not to fall apart. "We'll get out," I whispered, and I was surprised at how calm it sounded. "Can you hear me? It doesn't matter who it is. He's a human being. We will survive." She looked at me. Tears froze on her eyelashes. But she nodded. Slow, hard. I hugged her. For the first time since it all started, I did something not out of calculation, but just like a human being. Her body was hot and trembling, and in that embrace I realized that fear is not when it's dark, but when no one is around. And now we had at least the illusion of support. We were walking down a manhole. He led us to the back exit. Once, apparently, garbage was taken out here or used as a passage to the utility area. Haley was quietly telling how she was lured here. They promised to participate in the show, under the pretext of a documentary project. Then they dispersed everyone around the building and gave them walkie-talkies. An hour later, she heard screams. 2 days later, there was already one. And then the game started. With footsteps, voices, notes. Someone wanted her to start doubting herself. "I thought I was going crazy," she confessed. "At first I heard footsteps, then I stopped. There was light, then there wasn't. Then he started bringing food. Through the door. Small packages. A pack of cookies, water. As if he was courting. But he didn't talk. I've never talked. I just watched. I stopped. My heart was pounding like a hammer. I realized that she wasn't just a survivor. She was a victim, yes. But she was also evidence. He held her, fed her, watched her. It was not a spontaneous outburst of aggression. It was a carefully constructed ritual. We have reached the end of the manhole. There's a metal grate in front, and a lock on the outside. I took out a screwdriver and started unscrewing the bolts. Something stirred inside me again. Everything I was trying to suppress rose up: anger, helplessness, rage. I was opening the grate like opening a festering wound. When we finally got outside, I could smell the damp, the leaves, the night air. Not freedom, no. Just a pause. We were outside, but still inside this game. I didn't know where Joe was. I didn't know if he was still alive. But now I had Haley. And I could feel her breathing changing. She took a deep breath for the first time. For the first time in months. "We have to leave," she whispered. "Far away." "Let's go," I nodded. "But first, to the police. We have to tell you. You're not alone. And you never will be again." She looked at me for a long time. Then she suddenly hugged me. Not like she was saved. As a man who had held on for a long time, and now he could afford to be weak. I could feel her breathing against my neck, and I could hear her voice tremble when she said, "Thank you." And I didn't know what to say in response. The car was parked at the entrance. I opened the door and sat her down. Then he looked back. There was someone standing at the second-floor window. I couldn't see the face. just a silhouette. And even then, I wasn't scared. I just looked at it. Just a minute. Maybe two. And then I got in the car and started the engine. As we drove down the road, I could feel her shoulder pressed against mine. We didn't talk. She was looking out the window. I held the steering wheel. And at that moment, despite everything we've been through, I felt better. I chose her. And she chose to believe. And there was still a note in his pocket. With someone else's handwriting. And someone else's warning. But now I knew that if someone was really playing, they had made a mistake. He left a witness. And he gave me something that makes anyone stronger, someone worth fighting for. When I was a child, my father often said the same phrase, looking towards the woods behind our house. In these woods, everyone has their own truth, but not everyone tells it alive. I didn't understand then. I thought he was just drunk or wanted to scare me before going to bed. We lived in the wilderness, and my father was the kind of man who didn't trust cities, didn't like visitors, and preferred fishing at dawn than socializing with anyone. Mom left us when I was 8. I just didn't come home from work one day. I never found out if she left on her own or if something happened. My father was silent. Over time, I learned not to ask unnecessary questions. It's been many years. I left. I tried to forget that life. The city drew me in with its rhythm, work, a rented apartment, constant repairs in the kitchen, and empty conversations on the landing. But there was always something itchy inside. An unanswered question. When my father died, suddenly, from a stroke, I felt almost nothing. Just a quiet, sticky feeling, as if something was left unfinished. When his old friend Jim called me and told me that my father had left me a legacy of land and a hunting cabin in the north, the one that stood in the depths of the forest behind our house, I realized that I had to return there. Just to see. Just close this gestalt. I left in the morning. It was the beginning of autumn. The leaves were still hanging on the branches, but the air already smelled of rot and moisture. The old road leading to the site is almost overgrown. The GPS lost its signal after 40 miles, and I drove from memory, guided by a charred tree by the side of the road and a turn by a dried-up stream. By the time I got there, the sun was already starting to sink behind the hills. The hut stood there as if no one had touched it for decades. The roof had caved in a bit in one corner, but the walls were solid. I got out of the car, took my backpack and a flashlight and went to the door. It wasn't locked. She just pushed inside with a long, raspy groan. It smelled of wood, mold, and something else, faint but familiar. Either with old meat, or with a musty cloth. There was a dusty box on the table. Inside is a notebook, hunting cartridges, a knife with rust on the blade, and a stack of photographs wrapped with an elastic band. The first picture is of my father. Young, smiling. Next to him is some unknown guy with long hair. They are holding guns and standing against the background of that very hut. On the back, was written in black ink, October 8th. The last hunt with Tom. Don't repeat it. It took me a moment to understand what was meant. Maybe it's some kind of story, maybe a joke. But the very phrase jarred on my nerves. I put the photo back and began to disassemble the hut. The door to the basement was closed with a heavy iron beam. With an effort, I pushed it off and opened the lid. The smell hit me like a slap in the face. Dampness, earth, and something very old that should have disappeared long ago. I went down, clutching my sleeve to my nose. There were old crates, hunting gear, a couple of metal cages, and chains. Rusty, with locks. Heavy ones. Fixed directly in the concrete floor. I shuddered. What the hell was he doing here? I went upstairs, quickly, as if something was chasing me. I sat on the porch and smoked 2 cigarettes in a row, even though I quit a year ago. The forest was quiet. It's too quiet. I stayed the night. I put a sleeping bag on, lit an old stove. The smell is gone, or I just got used to it. But I didn't sleep well. It always seemed to me that someone was walking behind the walls. Not an animal, but steps. Weighty, slow, human. In the morning, I decided to comb through everything. First the cabin, then the surrounding area. There was a path behind the house that went deep into the forest. I walked along it, measuring my steps. After a couple 100 meters, I saw another building. A small shed. Almost destroyed. I peered inside cautiously. Dice. Not animal, but human. They were roughly thrown into a corner, covered with tendons and remnants of clothing. Next to it is an empty whiskey bottle and a rusty axe. And again, there's a note on the wall, nailed with a knife. If you're reading this, don't try to understand. Just leave. He made his choice. Who? Who made the choice? My father? I rushed out of the barn, my heart pounding in my throat. Everything inside turned upside down. I wanted to run, get in the car and drive away. But I couldn't. I had to find out what he had done. Who was he chaining? Who was in the photos? What the hell was going on in this place? I returned to the hut, and then I noticed that there was something under the layer of boards near the fireplace. I tore off 3 rotten boards. A tin box. Castle. I smashed it with a rock. Inside is a diary. The pages were yellowed and the ink was blurry, but I read it. What my father wrote did not fit into my head. Not because it was mystical. Because it was the truth. The dirty, scary, human truth that he had been carrying around for decades. Because it was the truth. The dirty, scary, human truth that he had been carrying around for decades. I was sitting on the floor by the fireplace, with a diary in my hands. The flame in the stove crackled softly, casting shadows on the walls, and this made the room seem alive. But not cozy. Rather, it was as if the hut was watching me, assessing what I would do next. The notes were uneven. Sometimes he wrote quickly, as if someone was urging him on. Sometimes, carefully, almost sterile. It all started innocuously, describing hunts, tracking tracks, talking to Jim. Then came the names. Strangers. He wrote about the people who came here with him. Sometimes to go fishing, sometimes just to relax. But almost all of them disappeared. He didn't even hide it, he just wrote, Tom couldn't stand it. I had to finish. John knew too much. I buried it deeper. I read it and didn't believe it. At first I thought it was senile nonsense against the background of loneliness. But then I saw the map, a homemade one, on the last page. It led to the places in the forest where there were crosses. Not drawn. Described. The first one is by an old pine tree, the second one is behind a fallen oak tree, and the third one is in a ravine. Everything inside me shuddered. He didn't just do it, he wrote it down. Systematized it. I couldn't stay. But he couldn't leave without checking, either. I went. He took a shovel that stood against the wall, a lantern, and followed the route. The first point is an old pine tree. I searched for a long time until I found a place where the earth was a couple of tones darker and denser. I started digging. At a depth of slightly less than an elbow, I caught something metallic. Another tin box. Inside is a woman's chain, broken glasses, and a small Walkman. There was a sticker on the player, Lucy. I didn't know who Lucy was. But something jumped inside. I found the flat batteries in the hut and put them in. He turned on. And there was a voice. Quiet, scared. Female. She was saying something unintelligible, as if she knew that no one else would hear her. And then a scream. One short one, as if someone had gagged her. The player has turned off. I almost dropped it into the leaves. I went to the second point. This time it's the remains. They were almost completely decayed, but the clothes were modern. And again, a tin box. This time, an old cell phone, a bunch of keys, and another note. He said that no one would be looking for us. I didn't believe it at first. But now it doesn't matter. I just pray that he dies first. I buried everything back. Gradually. It was getting worse with every move. It wasn't just my father. He was a man who had his own ritual. Not mystical. Very, very real. Cold, calculating. He knew who to bring. He chose. He was watching. And he didn't feel a single bit of regret. When I returned to the hut, I was shaking. I didn't eat or drink, I just sat against the wall, looking at the bourgeoisie. She was smoking. I could feel one thing throbbing in my head, you're his son. You're from his blood. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. Everything I knew about my family turned out to be a lie. Mom may have left for a reason. Maybe she understood something. Maybe she wasn't allowed to leave. The next morning, I got ready to leave. I threw a diary, photos, notes, even a tin box with things in the trunk. I wanted to turn it all over to the police. Let them figure it out. Let them dig. Let them find everyone. But before I left, I found an old letter in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. My name was written on it. By hand. There's a photo inside. Taken quite recently. Too recently. In it, I'm standing by the car, against the background of the forest. The photo was taken from the side of the hut. And on the back is my father's handwriting again. Your turn. You have to finish. I threw up right on the porch. I went through the house in a panic, found an old camera hidden under a canopy. It was turned on. She painted me. All this time. I turned on the car and drove off. At the limit. I didn't look back. But even after 100 miles, I didn't feel any relief. Because that story was in me now. I didn't know if I was being followed. I didn't know who else had read that diary. I didn't know who else he was calling to the forest. And the scariest thing is that I started to wonder. What if I'm his son after all? If there's even a drop of someone in me who wrote down names, buried bodies, and didn't feel anything? Now I'm sitting in my apartment. The windows are boarded up. I hear a noise outside the door. I know he's dead. But someone keeps going. And, perhaps, the diary did not come to me by chance. Or maybe it's true, not by chance. I haven't slept in 3 days. I just sat there. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I didn't move. The same question was buzzing in my head, what now? I thought I had escaped. That it was all left there in the forest. In the damp earth. But as soon as I returned, everything continued, as if I had just carried it with me. It wasn't left in that cabin. It stuck to me like the smell of rot on clothes, which I couldn't get rid of. I took everything I found to the police. Silently. Without details. A diary, a cassette, a Walkman, notes, a photo. He said he found it in an old house. They looked at me with restraint, with cold interest. They asked me to sign the protocol. I signed it. They said, if anything, we'll call you back. And they didn't call back. I was hoping that was it. That I passed the damn baton, and now others will do it. But 3 days later, I found a note in the doorway. A simple one, without an envelope. We know what you've read. It's not my father's handwriting. It wasn't his style at all. It was fast, hasty, and angular. And on the back is the address. As if someone wanted me to come. I wasn't going to. I burned the paper, turned off the phone, filled the mailbox with mounting foam, and reinstalled the doors. And then, at night, when I was sitting in the kitchen and drinking from a bottle, a light blinked outside the window. Once. One short pulse. Like a camera flash. I ran out into the darkness, but there was no one there. No tracks, no cars, no people. Just the smell of burnt matches. I've smelled it before. In the forest. In that pit. Near the player. In the morning, I went to the address that was on the piece of paper. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't not go. The house number is in the suburbs. Old, abandoned. With a broken porch and ingrown windows. There is emptiness inside. Just a stool, and on it is another diary. This one is no longer my father's. It was written by another person. A woman. I recognized the handwriting. It's Lucy. The one whose voice was playing in the player. She led everything too. My days. My thoughts. And she knew where she was, too. The pages were torn out, crumpled, and many were written nervously and with mistakes. But one record was clear. If you're reading this, it means you're one of them. Or you'll become one. We are not randomly chosen. We are not just being killed. They check on us first. Out of fear. For a reaction. For sympathy. They are not looking for resistance. They need those who are able to continue. If you didn't run away, congratulations. You've passed the first stage. My throat is dry. I didn't know if it was a bluff. It's a scary trick. Or the system. I began to remember my childhood. Father's behavior. His habits. How he invited my friends over and told them they needed to be quieter. The way he looked at them when he thought I couldn't see. I remembered how he once brought home a box with a lock. And he told me, if you ever open up, know that I respected you. Then I laughed. Now I wanted to turn myself inside out. System. Check. Selection. I went outside. There was a car parked right at the gate. The old one. The engine was humming. There's a man driving. He didn't come out. I was just watching. There was no signal. Didn't fit. He left a minute later. All I remember are the empty eyes. Tired. As if it wasn't the first time he had done this. I understood, it won't end until I break the chain. I returned home, opened my laptop, started writing. That's it. From beginning to end. With names, dates, and descriptions. All the notes, all the details, everything I found. I posted it online. Anonymously. To dozens of forums. And 2 days later, I received a message. Without text. Just a photo. My apartment. Filmed at night. From the street. The curtains were open. I didn't remember leaving them open. I closed the laptop. I took my suitcase out of the closet. I couldn't stay. I had to go. But where to? Without a difference. The main thing is to stay away. I took out the cash, turned off all my devices, left my phone in the supermarket parking lot, got into my old car and just drove off. Without a card. without a navigator, without a route, just deep down, where no one will ask who you are, where no one is looking out the windows at night. But even on the highway, when there were no lights or cars, I still felt that someone was following me. Not physically. Deeper. It's like they've implanted a memory inside me that's not mine. Someone else's fault. Other people's words. And most importantly, someone else's mission, which cannot be abandoned. I didn't ask her to. I inherited it. The way a family name is inherited. Time passed, and that worried me the most. I didn't know where I was. All the roads merged into one, the turns became somehow the same, the houses were blurred spots. Everything around him turned into a monotonous picture, from which he could not distract himself. The inner voice was not silent. He said it wasn't over. He kept telling me that I needed to keep going. And it wasn't just a feeling, not a fear. It was a clear instruction, like a command that cannot be disobeyed. I was looking for a place to hide. But at some point I realized that no matter where I was, they would find me anyway. I don't know how, I don't know why, but they're watching. They can see everything I've done. I couldn't run away from it. All I felt was the constant pressure. That burning fear when it seems to you that your next step is the last one, and you have to do it exactly, otherwise it will be too late. When I stopped to catch my breath, I noticed something strange. In the distance, among the trees, I saw something that would have been impossible to ignore. It was another hut. I knew I couldn't go there. I should have passed by. I took one step back, and immediately it became clear to me that I had already been noticed. That's the man. The same driver who saw me earlier. He stood at the door of this hut, motionless, watching. There was something familiar in his eyes. Fear. Doubt. But at the same time, determination. It was the same determination that I felt in myself. I realized that I wasn't the first. And certainly not the last. I got back in the car and drove on, but I couldn't rest anymore. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Why did it affect me so much? Why couldn't I forget? And most importantly, what should I do about it when I didn't seem to have a choice? I was getting colder with every kilometer. Not because I was in the forest, but because I knew that this chain would not end. All these people, these victims, all this that I have seen is not an accident. It was part of something much bigger. It's part of a chain that keeps growing. And I was one of the links. Every new face, every new place, every new footprint, it was all part of the game. I could only hope that at some point I would be on the right side. But what if I've been trapped for a long time and can't get out? If you've watched it to the end, you're one of the few who made it to the finals. Did you feel the cold tightening in your throat when he opened that door? Did you hear the silence behind the trees that seemed to hide something? Now think about it. What would have happened if he hadn't turned into the forest for the first time? Why did that hut reappear in another place? It couldn't be the same one, could it? Who was that driver on the doorstep? And why was there fear in his eyes instead of anger? He chose to go into the forest. What would you do? Write in the comments what you think really happened. Would you go into that cabin? Or would he have gone on as if nothing had happened? And don't forget, it was reality, not a horror story. Sometimes the real danger is not ghosts, but people. The Sosnovy Bereg camp has never been a place to relax. His story began with a high-profile scandal. In the 70s, the owner, former Marine Raymond Crow, bought a plot by the lake to build a character-building zone for difficult teenagers. He believed that physical pain and discipline would fix anyone. The children slept in barracks with leaky roofs, trained until they vomited, and for the slightest offense they were locked in the ice room, an old warehouse with broken windows. 2 years later, the camp was closed after 14-year-old Evan Shaw died of pneumonia. Raymond claimed that the boy was to blame for running away to swim at night. But his parents found bruises on Evan's body, and the pathologist's report said multiple rib fractures. The court found Crow guilty of manslaughter. A month after the verdict, he was found in the same warehouse with a noose around his neck. Since then, the camp has changed a dozen owners. Everyone tried to erase the past. They repainted the walls, renamed the buildings, but the legends about Raymond's ghost lived on. In the 90s, a group of scouts disappeared during a night game of hide-and-seek. Search dogs led to the lake, where they found a backpack with severed fingers in a coffee can. The rest were never found. I found out about this from a forum for fans of abandonment. Thread, Sosnovy Bereg, Truth or Fiction? It was full of photographs of dilapidated buildings, rusty beds, and children's drawings on the walls. One user wrote that thrill seekers come there every summer, but many do not return. I thought it was a story. I haven't received the email yet. An envelope without a stamp was lying on the doorstep. Inside is a map of the camp marked, "You're next," and a key to the gate. I thought it was a prank by my twin brother Kyle. He loved scaring me from childhood. He put dead rats in bed, sat in the closet with scissors in his hands. But the next day, Kyle called from the hospital. He was hit by a car while running after me in the park. I went to the camp alone. To prove that I'm not afraid, the road to the camp was like walking into someone else's reality. The pines closed over the asphalt, turning the day into twilight. The navigator had lost its signal a long time ago, but I remembered the map, the turn at the crooked sign, "Private property. Passage is prohibited." The gate hung on one hinge, and behind it was a clearing overgrown with weeds. The first building greeted me with the smell of mold and rotting boards. The walls are covered with graffiti, "Run, he's watching, he hates noise." There was a doll with no eyes and wrapped in barbed wire in the corner. I filmed everything on camera. I promised the subscribers of the vlogs a real horror. By evening, I found the diary. He was lying under the bed in the administrative building, wrapped in black plastic. The pages were covered with shaky handwriting. July 12th. We saw him today. He stands among the trees, his face covered with a welder's mask. Jason shouted, and he threw an axe at us. We ran, but Jason, he fell. The axe was sticking out of his back. We hid in the dining room. He knocks on the door. God, he's tapping the tune from Silent Night. The last entry ended with a blob that looked like blood. I woke up at night to a creaking sound. Something was being dragged across the floor on the floor above. I took a survival knife, Kyle gave it to me for 18 years, and followed the sound. The stairs were shaking, the floorboards were sinking underfoot. At the second stage, the tracks are streaks of mud, as if someone was dragging a bag. They led to a room with a boarded-up window. There were photographs hanging there. Hundreds of pictures, teenagers around a campfire, a girl with a backpack. I recognized her t-shirt from the forum, a guy cutting steak with a knife. My stomach clenched when I saw my face. The photo was taken today. I'm at the gate, with a card in my hand. The lock clicked from behind, the door slammed shut so abruptly that I instinctively pressed myself against the wall, dropping the flashlight. The glass shattered, and a beam of light danced across the ceiling, picking out fragments of the past, ragged webs of cobwebs, patches of mold in the shape of hands. The photographs of my eyes followed my every move. I grabbed a knife and rushed to the exit, but the handle wouldn't budge. Someone had inserted an iron bar from the outside. "It's not Raymond," I whispered, trying to stifle my panic. "There are no ghosts. So there's a living person here. The one who kept the camp in a state of controlled disintegration for years. The one who left footprints for the legends." Smoke wafted through the crack under the door. At first it was sweet, like burnt rubber, then it was acrid, like burning plastic. They set the building on fire. The window was boarded up, but one board was rotten at the base. I beat on it with the knife scabbard until my palm was numb. On the third blow, the wood gave way. I had to crawl through on my stomach, scratching my ribs on nails. The fresh air burned my lungs, but I couldn't run. A branch snapped below the window. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. A figure in a welder's jumpsuit slowly floated around the corner. The mask reflected the flames that were already licking the roof. He was carrying a chainsaw. She ran along the side of the building, tripping over the roots. An engine roared behind him, and he heard it. My legs were weak, but adrenaline drove me forward. I remembered my diary. He hates noise. I dropped my phone out of my pocket and stepped on it. The screen cracked, but the speaker squealed with static. I threw it into the bushes. The chainsaw was silent for a second, and I ducked into the drain pipe under the dining room. The clay stuck to my hands. The pipe led to the lake, but after 10 meters the passage narrowed. I had to crawl back when I heard the screech of metal on concrete as he set a trap at the exit. I switched the flashlight to red light mode and crawled in the opposite direction. The pipe led to the basement. Rusty freezers, shelves with bottles of medicines from the 80s. On the table is a homemade mannequin in my clothes. His stomach was split open, stuffed with pine cones and bird bones. There's a note pinned to his chest. "Resistance is a game. You already lost when you came back for it." A cold sweat broke out on his back. After him, Kyle? His accident in the park? Before I could collect my thoughts, a warm liquid dripped from the ceiling. She lifted the lantern, and there were bags of thick polyethylene hanging from the beams. One broke, and my hand fell on top of me. On the ring finger is an engagement ring with the inscription, RS plus MS. Are Raymond Crowe and Martha Shaw Evans' mother? A knock from above. He walks through the first floor, methodically checking the rooms. I hid behind the freezer when the hatch in the ceiling creaked open. Through the crack I saw boots, gasoline stains on the soles. He lowered the ladder and froze, listening to the silence. His hand reached for the mask. A siren wailed in the distance. Maybe the fireman? Or my hallucinations? The mask fell to the concrete floor with a dull clang. I dug my nails into the rusty side of the freezer, expecting to see the maniac's disfigured face, scars, or madness in his eyes. But he was under the mask. Kyle. My brother. His lips stretched into a familiar grin, the one with which he once showed me the dead pigeon in the school locker. Surprise, sis. He bent down, picking up the mask. There was a fresh scar on his neck from the noose. The one I gave him last Christmas as a joke. You didn't think I'd let you become popular without me, did you? His hand with the chainsaw shook, and I rushed forward, grabbing a bottle labeled phenobarbital from the shelf. She threw it in his face. The glass shattered, white powder mixed with the blood on his cheekbone. Kyle screamed, closing his eyes, and I slipped to the stairs. He grabbed my ankle when I was already on the third step. I hit the bridge of my nose with my heel and the cartilage cracked. His fingers opened, and I pulled away, flying into the hallway. A shelf collapsed behind him, and Kyle stumbled over it, blinded by chemicals. I ran towards the smell of burning. Flames were already consuming the dormitory, sparks falling on the dried grass. His head was throbbing. He had faked his death. He faked the accident. And now, why? When I reached the gate, I stopped. Kyle's backpack was hanging on a pole. Inside is my old diary, stolen from home. On the last page, there is a photo pasted in. When we were 7 years old, we cut a cake with the inscription, "Happy Birthday, Psychopaths." His handwriting is on top. You've always been afraid of being unnecessary. I'll make you a star. A shot rang out from behind. The shot penetrated the backpack, leaving a hole in the tree. Kyle was standing outside the dining room with a sawed-off shotgun in his hands. His face looked like meat after a blender. The phenobarbital had eaten into the wounds. Don't you understand? Stop it, he shouted, reloading his rifle. We will create a legend. You will die beautifully, in a fire, like a witch. And I'll be the one to find your bones. We will be immortal. I rushed to the lake. The water here was black, the shores dotted with sharp rocks. I took off my shoes. Kyle hated it when I ran barefoot. He said it was for beggars. She jumped into the water when the first shot broke the surface. I swam underwater until my lungs exploded. She surfaced at the old pier, a board with nails sticking out of the depths. I grabbed her. Kyle was already ashore. He dropped the gun and pulled out a knife, a replica of mine, given on the same birthday. Do you remember how we cut the Barbie doll? He lunged, and I jumped back, feeling the blade graze my T-shirt. You were crying, and I was laughing. You've always been weak. The board was shaking in my hands. I swung, aiming for the knee. He dodged, but the nail bit into his thigh. He screamed and fell to the sand. I stepped on his wrist, knocking out the knife. I'm not who I was when I was 7, I hissed, putting the blade to his throat. He laughed. Then kill me. Become a heroine. The hand trembled. Silhouettes floated in my eyes, 2 children in a hospital room, where he smothered me with a pillow until I stopped breathing. His mother said he didn't want to. She threw the knife into the lake. You don't deserve to be a legend. I ran towards the burning camp while Kyle was yelling something about cowardice. In the office, through the smoke, I found what I was looking for, an old cable from the generator. She wrapped it around the gate handle, tying the other end to Kyle's truck. He was limping towards the lake when I started the engine. The gas hit the floor, the cable stretched, the gate collapsed, crushing his legs. His scream mixed with the roar of the fire. I didn't turn around. I walked along the road until the sirens became louder than the screams in my head. He faked the accident to make me feel guilty. Everything is for the sake of this performance. For the sake of control. For the sake of a spectacular ending to his twisted game. Beyond the gates, the camp was engulfed in flames. A wall of fire cut off the way to the car. I turned into the woods, stumbling, losing my shoes, scratching my face on branches. The saw screamed again, behind me. He knew the route. He knew my reactions. He knew me too well. I only stopped at the old boat station. A dilapidated building loomed over the lake. Inside are the remains of kayaks, charred oars, ropes. The suffocating smell of rot. She locked herself in, lay low. It was quiet outside. It's too quiet. I got up to look out the window, and then the planks of the wall flew apart. He burst in like a storm, the mask back on his face. Saw stalled, empty tank? Or a pause to give me hope? Kyle dropped it, straightened up, and, as if in a theater, spread his arms. Here she is. The last scene. We're back together. I grabbed Nor and hit him on the shoulder. He staggered, but didn't back down. He grabbed my jacket and threw me to the floor. The air was knocked out of my lungs. He sat on top of me, pinning my arms, his face almost close to mine. You've forgotten me. I replaced them with likes, friends, and videos. But I knew you'd come back one day. To become a part of history. Our history. I could smell phenobarbital, blood, and burning. His breathing. Weeping. Your own, and others. It's not love, Kyle, I breathed. It's a mania. He froze. He blinked. For a second, it was as if he had returned to himself. But it was enough. I hit him headfirst with my forehead in the nose. A flash of pain, a scream. He rolled backwards. I jumped up, grabbed a rope from the floor and wrapped it around his neck. Not delaying, just distracting. Then she pushed him through the open window of the boathouse. He fell into the water. The muddy lake churned. I waited, my heart pounding. He didn't come up. 10 seconds have passed. 20. 30. There were no bubbles. I went out, my legs were shaking. The flames lit up the sky behind him. The campsite burned to the ground. His past is mine, too. An hour later, I reached the road. I caught a hitchhiker, an elderly trucker who didn't ask questions. He just handed me a bottle of water and said, "You have the look, like people who've been through something. Hold on, girl." I didn't tell him. Not to him, not to the police. Not even to my subscribers. The camera burned down. There was no proof. Only a burn on his arm and a scar on his cheek. And a picture on my phone from the cloud, me, at the camp gate, with a map. The only reminder. But sometimes, when I fall asleep, I hear in my head, "Surprise, little sister." And I know he's still there. Somewhere in the forest, under the ashes and pines. He's waiting. I couldn't believe my eyes. These words, written in uneven handwriting on a piece of paper, seemed simple, but there was a sense of panic in them. There is desperation in every curve of the letters. I took the paper between two fingers, as if it might burn me, and slowly knelt down on the dusty concrete. Next to it is a flattened jar, an empty pack of cigarettes and a smell. Something rancid, almost sweet. The smell of neglect and loneliness. The apartment I found myself in looked long abandoned, but not abandoned. There was still someone's life here, but it was as if it had been suddenly interrupted. Broken. There's a cup of dried coffee on the windowsill, a plate of mildewed leftovers in the sink, and newspapers scattered on the floor. I ran my fingers over the cover of one of them. It was a recent year. This is not an archive. Someone lived here quite recently. I noticed another detail on the table by the window, an old dictaphone. The cassette. I haven't seen anything like this in 10 years. It was turned off, but there was a tape nearby. I inserted it and pressed play. The first thing I heard was breathing. It was long, heavy, and strained, as if the man was trying to catch his breath after a long run. Then a voice. I do not know who will listen to this. Maybe no one. But if someone did find it, please, just leave. Don't repeat my mistake. Don't try to understand. Pause. Nothing for a couple of seconds, just a faint rustle of film. I thought it was just an oddity. That the neighbors, well, there are people who are introverted, taciturn. We're all like that now. I thought I imagined it. But then everything became too real. Those sounds at night. The creaks. Not footsteps, but something else. It was as if the furniture was moving on its own. The walls seemed to breathe. The voice on the recording side. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I started following them. For the neighbors. I wrote it down, took notes. They knew. I saw one of them just standing at the door of my apartment one day. He didn't knock. He just stood there. And waited. About 10 minutes. Then he left. I pressed pause. My heart was pounding. I got up and went to the window. The courtyard was empty. Perfectly empty. Not a single person, not a single sound. There was only the faint hum of the wind and the swaying clotheslines. Everything seemed frozen. I clicked play again. The last thing I recorded, the voice continued, was a woman's voice. I could hear her singing. Without words. A melody, soft and hollow, as if through concrete. I went to the wall and started writing. Here. There was a noise. It was as if someone had turned on the radio between the waves. Then there are fragments of sounds, and, indeed, something similar to singing. It's long. Without emotion. It's like a lullaby that makes you feel worse, not calmer. I turned off the recorder and left it in place. And suddenly I realized that I was no longer alone in the apartment. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear any footsteps. But the air in the room had changed. There was a sense of presence. It was as if someone was standing behind him, but there was no breathing, no sound. I turned around abruptly, but there was no one there. Empty. But there was a light on in the hallway now. And I was sure that I had turned it off when I entered. I didn't call out. I didn't ask, "Who's here?" These phrases sound silly in real life. You just freeze. The body is waiting, the brain is catching up. I walked slowly to the doorway. I looked in. The coat hanging by the entrance swayed as if someone had just walked past it. There are footprints underfoot. Fresh ones. Someone walked barefoot across the dusty floor. The tracks led deeper into the apartment, to where there was a corridor and closed rooms. I could have left. Right now. Turn around, get out, forget. But something held on. Curiosity? Fear? Or what I understood, if I leave, I won't be able to forget. I won't be able to sleep. It will rot in my head like someone else's life that I accidentally touched. I followed the tracks. They led to the farthest room, where previously, according to the apartment plan, there should have been a bedroom. The door is ajar. Through the crack, darkness. There was no light, no movement. I nudged her with my shoulder. A creak. There was a smell of dust and something familiar. The room was empty. But on the wall opposite the door, someone had scratched a phrase with their nails. I saw everything. But they pretend that I don't exist. Under the wall is an old mattress covered with a blanket. And there's another piece of paper next to it. The handwriting is different, uneven, fast, as if it was written in a hurry. There was. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. They copy the behavior. They're adjusting. They're watching. You'll know which one of them is different if you stay here longer than a day. But then it will be too late. I abruptly left the room. He returned to the kitchen. He sat down at the table. I needed to think about it. Everything that was happening did not fit in my head. Not a single supernatural detail, everything is absolutely real. Simply. It's scary. Terrifyingly real. And I started to remember, that man in the hallway last night. Neighbor. He said hello, but he didn't blink once. He stood in the same position the whole time he was talking. The voice was normal. But there were no nuances in it. No accent, no tone, no fatigue. It was as if he was speaking according to a template. I stood up abruptly. I needed to get out of here. Immediately. But when I got to the door, I realized that the lock was different. Not the one I opened this morning. It was equipped with an internal rotary key. I didn't rush upstairs. I just stood there and listened. In the darkness of the basement, the sound became more voluminous. Not louder, but more lively. It was as if someone had dropped a plate from above, as if someone had deliberately let me know, I'm here. I slowly climbed the steps, each step was like a shot in the void. There is a ringing silence in my head. My palms are wet, and my heart is pounding, but not from fear, but from readiness. Like before a fight. Or before you enter a house where, you know, you are not welcome. I opened the kitchen door abruptly. Empty. The lights were dim. There was indeed a plate on the floor. It broke, the fragments scattered across the tiles. I squinted, the fragments formed a strange shape, as if someone had deliberately arranged them in a semicircle. Maybe it's a coincidence. But it didn't seem that way to me. There was a fork by the trash can. There's water in the sink, even though I didn't draw it. I came closer. My face was visible on the mirrored surface of the water. Only it didn't move with me. It froze. Watched it. And, I'm not a mythomaniac, it smiled. I blinked. The face repeated itself. It was only then that I realized it wasn't a mirror. Just a reflection from the window behind my back. But I didn't see myself. There was someone standing behind the glass. When I turned around abruptly, there was no one there. There were no prints on the wet glass, not a single drop on the windowsill. But I'm not stupid. I'm being watched. It's been a long time. I wanted to call someone. Just to hear a human voice. But when I picked up the phone, the screen was dark. Dead. I put it on charge, nothing. No reaction. It's like it's not the battery that's dead, but something inside. He broke away from the world. I spent the next day under a tranquilizer. I ate whatever I could, hardly spoke, just sat and listened to the rain. He didn't go anywhere. I didn't even look out the window. I knew someone was there, and if I made eye contact with him, he'd come in. Not literally, of course. He's already here, but he's not completely inside yet. By evening, I remembered about the dictaphone. He took out the tape. I examined it. The second one. But with a signature. Small, almost faded. You'll remember. Or not. It doesn't matter anymore. I inserted the tape, pressed play. The voice was the same. Hoarse, but calm. You didn't ask who I was. I didn't try to guess. He didn't want to know. It was easier for you to think that it was someone outside. Alien. But no. It's you. Only earlier. Before I became like this. You were alive. You made a choice. And now you're the shadow of a choice. I turned off the recorder. He threw away the tape. Smashed it on the corner of the table. My hands started shaking, but not from fear. Out of rage. At myself. For letting it in. What I let happen. I went down to the basement again. I started sorting through things. Folders, photos, pieces of old clothes. There were receipts. The names. Faces. People who seemed to have lived here before me. One is a doctor. The other is a teacher. A female realtor. They were all going crazy, judging by the notes that were lying nearby. I read one. Smooth, neat handwriting. On the 6th day, I began to hear a voice behind the wall. But there is no wall. I checked it out. It's not the voice I'm afraid of. I'm afraid he's saying what I would have said myself. And that he's right. I don't know which one of us is real anymore. Another. He doesn't break down the door. He's waiting. He's waiting for me to come out. I'm almost ready. One more day and I'll let him go. And let it be as it will be. In the last one, with a trembling hand, it was written. If you're reading this, you're almost there. But you have a choice. Don't listen. Never listen to something that sounds like you. It's not you. This is who you will become if you give up. I was sitting on the concrete floor. With a flashlight, papers, photographs, and other people's voices in my head. And I understood, each of them thought that he was not like that. What will hold? That he can handle it. That it's not about him. And everyone eventually left behind only a piece of paper. I got up. I decided, that's enough. We need to leave. Right now. Even in the rain, even in the woods, even barefoot. Just leave. When I went out into the hallway, the door was already ajar. It's not open, it's not cracked, just a little bit, literally in the palm of your hand. It was as if I was being told, decide for yourself. If you want to get out, get out. If you want to stay, don't complain. I took a step forward. Then the second one. Came out. The rain was beating on my shoulders, on the back of my head. The clothes immediately stuck to the body. Not a single car. Not a single streetlight. Just me, the road, and the endless fucking rain. I went. I walked for a long time. I lost track of time. The rain was warm. The air is sticky. One thought was throbbing in my head, the main thing was not to stop. But when I looked back, the house was still there. Behind. In the same place. I didn't move. I stood there, looking at the house, and couldn't understand how this was possible. As I walked, I could feel my legs getting tired, my jeans sticking to my legs from the rain, my chest squeezing from the dampness, but still I stood in the same place. The house was still behind me. The windows, the roof, the old door with peeling paint. He didn't disappear. He didn't shrink in size, didn't get any further. He's simple. He didn't leave. I didn't go back inside. I just sat down right on the wet asphalt at the edge of the road, letting the rain run down my face. That was the first time I really thought about it. Maybe it wasn't the house. Maybe it's me. About who I've become in recent days. Not going crazy alone is one thing. But living among the memories of other people's fears, other people's defeats is something else. They are absorbed. They are being recorded. They eat into it. I didn't come back to the house because I wanted to. Because there was nowhere else to go. No phone, no signal, not even a sense of time. I didn't know what time it was. The night? A day? Morning? Everything was mixed into one gray-black lump. When I got inside again, the first thing I heard was footsteps. Not loud. Lungs. It was as if someone had walked barefoot down the hallway. But I wasn't looking for anyone. I sat down on the floor. He leaned back against the wall. And just waited. 2 hours later, or maybe 5 minutes later, I found a pack of cigarettes in my pocket. Passed. He lit a cigarette. Right in the house. Right in this rotting, cursed space that has absorbed everyone who has ever lived in it, yes, without mysticism, but with a human curse. Fear, hopelessness, loneliness, they accumulate. People leave them. They don't disappear. They are absorbed into the floor, walls, and air. And then they are passed on. I found the notebook. The old one. There were names, notes, pages with torn out pieces. Reading it, I realized that this house is not random. He chooses. It doesn't kill. It doesn't scare you. It just keeps you inside. Alive. Until you give up on yourself. Until you become a part of it. There was a short note in a sprawling handwriting. You won't understand until you become silence. Until you're alone with her. She doesn't speak. She doesn't ask. She just stays. And you're with her. Those words stuck in my head. I lay down on the couch. He closed his eyes. I didn't feel like sleeping. But the body gave up. Fatigue overcame everything. And as soon as I fell into a doze, I saw not a dream, but flashes. Flashes of how I came here. Not in the house. Into this state. At first, everything was fine. Work, housing, some people nearby. Then the gaps started. I was forgetting why I came to the store. Why did I call my friend? Then he stopped answering his phone. Then he stopped calling. And then he just stopped coming out. And one day I realized that I was already here. In this house. I don't remember how I moved in. I don't remember what happened to what happened before. It's just that one day I woke up in this damp, crackling nest and didn't go anywhere else. When I woke up, the cigarette had burned out. There was a new note next to it. It wasn't there before. I'm sure. It said, "You thought you chose this house. But the truth is, you just weren't any good anymore." I didn't know who wrote it. Maybe I'll do it myself. Maybe someone who lived before me. But the meaning was as accurate as a headshot. I didn't choose to be alone. I just stopped being needed. To nobody. Not to my friends, not to my family, not to the city where I lived. I became silence. And the house let me in like a funnel. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Just sat there. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he talked to himself. Sometimes he wrote down his thoughts. Lots of pages. Very much. They were all left somewhere on the shelves, in drawers, between old magazines. I don't even remember what I wrote. You might be reading this right now. Maybe you're next. I sat by the window and watched the rain continue to pound on the broken glass. During all this time, I didn't hear any cars, no voices, or even the sound of dripping water in the bathroom. There was only the sound of the wind and the drops that kept hitting the rotten frame, as if they were trying to remind me that there was something else outside. Life, maybe. Or just a road. I got up. Gradually. Not because he was weak, but because he didn't know why to get up. But he got up anyway. I walked through the house, through the same rooms, up the same stairs as on the first day. And suddenly it dawned on me, it wasn't the house that was holding me. I decided to stay myself. Because there's too much emptiness outside. And here, at least the walls. Let them be old, let them be soaked and cracked from time to time, but their own. I opened the door. She creaked, as if she didn't believe I was doing this. The air outside was no better than the air inside, still heavy, cool, and humid. But I went out. Without things. Without thinking about where. I just went. The road was no longer circling. I walked forward, and the house was left behind. Without tragedy. Without shouting. He just stayed. Just like old photos remain in the drawers, they are not needed by anyone, but they are not thrown away either. I did not return to the city. I didn't call anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know where to start. But I was walking. Every step was simple and necessary. Without strain, without far-fetched meaning. Just a step. Then the second one. Then another one. And at some point I realized that I wasn't thinking about home anymore. He became just a dot on a personal map. Without emotion. Without weight. Just a part of what happened. And that was enough. I didn't rush upstairs. I just stood there and listened. In the darkness of the basement, the sound became more voluminous. Not louder, but more lively. It was as if someone had dropped a plate from above, as if someone had deliberately let me know, I'm here. I slowly climbed the steps, each step was like a shot in the void. There is a ringing silence in my head. My palms are wet, and my heart is pounding, but not from fear, but from readiness. Like before a fight. Or before you enter a house where, you know, you are not welcome. I opened the kitchen door abruptly. Empty. The lights were dim. There was indeed a plate on the floor. It broke, the fragments scattered across the tiles. I squinted, the fragments formed a strange shape, as if someone had deliberately arranged them in a semicircle. Maybe it's a coincidence. But it didn't seem that way to me. There was a fork by the trash can. There's water in the sink, even though I didn't draw it. I came closer. My face was visible on the mirrored surface of the water. Only it didn't move with me. It froze. Watched it. And, I'm not a mythomaniac, it smiled. I blinked. The face repeated itself. It was only then that I realized it wasn't a mirror. Just a reflection from the window behind my back. But I didn't see myself. There was someone standing behind the glass. When I turned around abruptly, there was no one there. There were no prints on the wet glass, not a single drop on the windowsill. But I'm not stupid. I'm being watched. It's been a long time. I wanted to call someone. Just to hear a human voice. But when I picked up the phone, the screen was dark. Dead. I put it on charge, nothing. No reaction. It's like it's not the battery that's dead, but something inside. He broke away from the world. I spent the next day under a tranquilizer. I ate whatever I could, hardly spoke, just sat and listened to the rain. He didn't go anywhere. I didn't even look out the window. I knew someone was there, and if I made eye contact with him, he'd come in. Not literally, of course. He's already here, but he's not completely inside yet. By evening, I remembered about the dictaphone. He took out the tape. I examined it. The second one. But with a signature. Small, almost faded, you'll remember. Or not. It doesn't matter anymore. I inserted the tape, pressed play. The voice was the same. Hoarse, but calm. You didn't ask who I was. I didn't try to guess. He didn't want to know. It was easier for you to think that it was someone outside. Alien. But no. It's you. Only earlier. Before I became like this. You were alive. You made a choice. And now you're the shadow of a choice. I turned off the recorder. He threw away the tape. Smashed it on the corner of the table. My hands started shaking, but not from fear. Out of rage. At myself. For letting it in. What I let happen. I went down to the basement again. I started sorting through things. Folders, photos, pieces of old clothes. There were receipts. The names. Faces. People who seemed to have lived here before me. One is a doctor. The other is a teacher. A female realtor. They were all going crazy, judging by the notes that were lying nearby. I read one. Smooth, neat handwriting. On the sixth day, I began to hear a voice behind the wall. But there is no wall. I checked it out. It's not the voice I'm afraid of. I'm afraid he's saying what I would have said myself. And that he's right. I don't know which one of us is real anymore. Another. He doesn't break down the door. He's waiting. He's waiting for me to come out. I'm almost ready. One more day and I'll let him go. And let it be as it will be. In the last one, with a trembling hand, it was written. If you're reading this, you're almost there. But you have a choice. Don't listen. Never listen to something that sounds like you. It's not you. This is who you will become if you give up. I was sitting on the concrete floor. With a flashlight, papers, photographs, and other people's voices in my head. And I understood, each of them thought that he was not like that. What will hold? That he can handle it. That it's not about him. And everyone eventually left behind only a piece of paper. I got up. I decided, that's enough. We need to leave. Right now. Even in the rain, even in the woods, even barefoot. Just leave. When I went out into the hallway, the door was already ajar. It's not open, it's not cracked, just a little bit, literally in the palm of your hand. It was as if I was being told, decide for yourself. If you want to get out, get out. If you want to stay, don't complain. I took a step forward. Then the second one came out. The rain was beating on my shoulders, on the back of my head. The clothes immediately stuck to the body. Not a single car. Not a single streetlight. Just me, the road, and the endless fucking rain. I went. I walked for a long time. I lost track of time. The rain was warm. The air is sticky. One thought was throbbing in my head, the main thing was not to stop. But when I looked back, the house was still there. Behind. In the same place. I didn't move. I stood there, looking at the house, and couldn't understand how this was possible. As I walked, I could feel my legs getting tired, my jeans sticking to my legs from the rain, my chest squeezing from the dampness, but still I stood in the same place. The house was still behind me. The windows, the roof, the old door with peeling paint. He didn't disappear. He didn't shrink in size, didn't get any further. He's simple. He didn't leave. I didn't go back inside. I just sat down right on the wet asphalt at the edge of the road, letting the rain run down my face. That was the first time I really thought about it. Maybe it wasn't the house. Maybe it's me. About who I've become in recent days. Not going crazy alone is one thing. But living among the memories of other people's fears, other people's defeats is something else. They are absorbed. They are being recorded. They eat into it. I didn't come back to the house because I wanted to. Because there was nowhere else to go. No phone, no signal, not even a sense of time. I didn't know what time it was. The night? A day? Morning? Everything was mixed into one gray-black lump. When I got inside again, the first thing I heard was footsteps. Not loud. Lungs. It was as if someone had walked barefoot down the hallway. But I wasn't looking for anyone. I sat down on the floor. He leaned back against the wall. And just waited. 2 hours later, or maybe 5 minutes later, I found a pack of cigarettes in my pocket. Passed. He lit a cigarette. Right in the house. Right in this rotting, cursed space that has absorbed everyone who has ever lived in it, yes, without mysticism, but with a human curse. Fear, hopelessness, loneliness, they accumulate. People leave them. They don't disappear. They are absorbed into the floor, walls, and air. And then they are passed on. I found the notebook. The old one. There were names, notes, pages with torn-out pieces. Reading it, I realized that this house is not random. He chooses. It doesn't kill. It doesn't scare you. It just keeps you inside. Alive. Until you give up on yourself. Until you become a part of it. There was a short note in a sprawling handwriting. You won't understand until you become silence. Until you're alone with her. She doesn't speak. She doesn't ask. She just stays. And you're with her. Those words stuck in my head. I lay down on the couch. He closed his eyes. I didn't feel like sleeping. But the body gave up. Fatigue overcame everything. And as soon as I fell into a doze, I saw not a dream, but flashes. Flashes of how I came here. Not in the house. Into this state. At first, everything was fine. Work, housing, some people nearby. Then the gaps started. I was forgetting why I came to the store. Why did I call my friend? Then he stopped answering his phone. Then he stopped calling. And then he just stopped coming out. And one day I realized that I was already here. In this house. I don't remember how I moved in. I don't remember what happened to what happened before. It's just that one day I woke up in this damp, crackling nest and didn't go anywhere else. When I woke up, the cigarette had burned out. There was a new note next to it. It wasn't there before. I'm sure. It said, "You thought you chose this house. But the truth is, you just weren't any good anymore." I didn't know who wrote it. Maybe I'll do it myself. Maybe someone who lived before me. But the meaning was as accurate as a headshot. I didn't choose to be alone. I just stopped being needed. To nobody. Not to my friends, not to my family, not to the city where I lived. I became silence. And the house let me in like a funnel. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Just sat there. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he talked to himself. Sometimes he wrote down his thoughts. Lots of pages. Very much. They were all left somewhere on the shelves, in drawers, between old magazines. I don't even remember what I wrote. You might be reading this right now. Maybe you're next. I sat by the window and watched the rain continue to pound on the broken glass. During all this time, I didn't hear any cars, no voices, or even the sound of dripping water in the bathroom. There was only the sound of the wind and the drops that kept hitting the rotten frame, as if they were trying to remind me that there was something else outside. Life, maybe. Or just a road. I got up. Gradually. Not because he was weak, but because he didn't know why to get up. But he got up anyway. I walked through the house, through the same rooms, up the same stairs as on the first day. And suddenly it dawned on me, it wasn't the house that was holding me. I decided to stay myself. Because there's too much emptiness outside. And here, at least the walls. Let them be old, let them be soaked and cracked from time to time, but their own. I opened the door. She creaked, as if she didn't believe I was doing this. The air outside was no better than the air inside, still heavy, cool, and humid. But I went out. Without things. Without thinking about where. I just went. The road was no longer circling. I walked forward, and the house was left behind. Without tragedy. Without shouting. He just stayed. Just like old photos remain in the drawers, they are not needed by anyone, but they are not thrown away either. I did not return to the city. I didn't call anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know where to start. But I was walking. Every step was simple and necessary. Without strain, without far-fetched meaning. Just a step. Then the second one. Then another one. And at some point I realized that I wasn't thinking about home anymore. He became just a dot on a personal map. Without emotion. Without weight. Just a part of what happened. And that was enough. When my brother Kevin disappeared, the police closed the case 3 weeks later. He had no enemies, debts, or strange habits. He just packed his backpack, refueled the car and left. As he wrote to me in a message, "I'm going to see the old village, the one next to the mill. Then I'll tell you what I found." There was no more word from him. Many people thought that he had simply moved to another city and started a new life. Even the parents accepted it. They had to move on somehow. But I'm not. He wasn't like that. We have traveled together since childhood. He always sent photos, wrote coordinates, and let us know if he spends the night in a tent. This time was different. I started looking for it myself. I rewound his route, collected all the checks from his bank card, and asked people at gas stations. So I came to a small dilapidated settlement, marked on the old map as Dunridge Hollow, a village in a lowland, overgrown, long forgotten. Kevin's last entry on his phone, the coordinates leading there. This village was partially demolished back in the 80s, because of landslides, infrastructure problems, but in fact, because of something that no one really talked about. I found a couple of mentions on the forums of diggers and local historians. It all came down to one thing: it was better not to go there. Especially to the mill. In the photographs, the mill looked creepy even in daylight, a long, elongated brick building that had fallen out in places, with narrow attic windows and an old metal mechanism at the entrance. I didn't believe in the stories. He believed only in facts. And one of them was like this: my brother drove there and disappeared. I rented a pickup truck, took with me a set of tools, a flashlight, a canteen with water, a first aid kit, a change of clothes and a map. There was no asphalt to Dunridge Hollow. I drove the last mile along an overgrown track until I had to leave the car and walk. When I entered the village, I had the feeling that I had entered a strange, alien world. All the houses were dilapidated, as if they had been gnawed by time. Wooden shutters hung down like broken arms, roofs caved in, doors stood wide open. Not a single sound. There weren't even any birds. Just the wind blowing through the boards and blowing dust out of the windows. I found 3 houses where it was still possible to walk across the floor without falling through. One was a former store. I found an old showcase with broken bottles and frames with faded price tags. The second one is residential, with a child's bed and toys covered with dense cobwebs. The third is a house with an attic, which I found. Boot 1. Kevin's shoe. I remembered him. We used to buy them together before going to the national park. I checked it. It had a torn backdrop, like my brother's. There was an aluminum flask nearby, the same one he had on his belt. It was a footprint. I was there. The mill was further away, about a mile from the center of the village, on the outskirts. I got there in the evening. The sun beat through the ragged clouds, turning the sky a rusty red, as if the sky itself was warning them not to come in. But I went. The building was taller than I thought. 4 floors, an old brick building surrounded by a concrete frame, all eaten away by time. The iron doors were smashed down, as if someone or something had knocked them out from the inside. It was empty inside. Quietly. The floor is concrete, with oil stains, as if someone had recently repaired something there. There are old ads on the walls, yellowed and almost unreadable. I made out one of them anyway. Workers are strictly forbidden to stay in the building after sunset. Violations are punishable by dismissal. I felt a chill. Why? Because of an old ad? Because of the empty building? Or is it because I feel like I'm not alone? I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. There were workshops there, broken mechanisms, chains, hooks, tables with iron parts. I walked along the walls, shone a flashlight, nothing. Only rust and scraps of cloth. But in the far corner, I noticed a door that looked like newer. Not new, no, but not as rotten as everything else. There was a small room behind the door, and in it there was a cot, a tin cupboard, and a table. There's a notebook on the table. I opened it. It was the security guard's notebook. The recordings were sparse, but one caught the eye. 3.08, the boy came again. I kept looking at the second press. I said to stay out of it. In the evening, his jacket was left on the hook. I haven't seen it again. 6.08, 3 people came. They said they were looking for my brother. I didn't let her in. I'm tired of it. It's all the same. 9.08, there was a scream again. Below. I didn't go. 12.08, the light was on in the lower shop. I'm not touching it. None of my business. I could feel the sweat sliding down my back. Who wrote this? When? If the 3 came, did it mean that someone else was trying to look for them? Or is it missing too? I went back down and found the stairs leading down. Basement. A narrow concrete staircase with metal railings. Down, down again, until the air changed. Dampness, dust, the smell of old oil and something rotting. I took out a flashlight. There's an empty hallway to the left, and a door to the right. I pushed her. There was a warehouse inside. But not the usual one. There were wooden boxes like coffins. They're open. One with a rusty knife. The second one had blood-stained clothes. Third, I won't describe what was inside. I'll just say it wasn't clothes. And not a tool. It was a man. Or what's left of it. I ran back out, not breathing. He stopped at the wall, tore out his breakfast, and spat, gasping for breath. Then I heard it, sound. Not footsteps. The rattle. Metal on metal. Somewhere up there. I turned off the flashlight and leaned against the wall. He was breathing. Gradually. He hardly breathed. Waited. When the sound was gone, I got up again, not out of curiosity, but because I knew Kevin could be here somewhere. Or at least what's left of it. I slowly climbed back up to the first floor, still feeling the taste of rust and panic in my mouth. The air was thick, as if someone had squeezed all the oxygen out of it, and now they had to share it with dirt, dust, and fear. There is heaviness on my legs, and a pressing hum in my head. I wasn't looking for adventures anymore. I just wanted to understand what happened here and find at least a trace of what was left of my brother. At least that's something. When I returned to the main workshop, I noticed that one of the lifts, which used to lower bags and equipment into the lower compartment, was swaying slightly. Not much, barely perceptible, as if a draft was moving a metal cable. I walked over. Next to it is a control panel, covered in dirt and rusty stains, but with one relatively clean switch. Someone touched it recently. I didn't press it. I was just looking at the elevator, at the oil stains and a strange, brownish liquid on the floor that looked like blood, but dried so much that it was already part of the concrete. I walked around the shop one more time and only then noticed a small door in the wall, boarded up from the outside with a thick wooden board. She stood out, too clean, as if she hadn't touched time. There are deep notches on the board, as if someone was trying to get out from inside. Nails? A tool? I did not know. But the board was held down by 2 old metal bolts. I took out a screwdriver and started unscrewing it. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, to open or not to open. When the board fell, cold air hit my face. There was a narrow passage behind it, damp, brick, with a ceiling so low that I had to walk bent over. I turned on the flashlight. The floor is earthen. The walls have remnants of insulation and are covered with mold. I walked for about 10 minutes before I found myself in a room the size of a garage. There was a table, 2 metal chairs, and a camera. The usual black one, like for shooting a blog. The power was dead, but there was a battery inside. I picked her up and took her upstairs. I returned to the car and found an external battery in my backpack. Enabled it. The screen lit up. There were 3 videos. All of them were removed on the last day. I clicked on the first one. Kevin's face is on the screen. He looked exhausted. Selfie videos, poor lighting, but the recognizable mill building is behind. If you're watching this, it means I didn't get out. I came here just out of interest. Everything started out fine, old mechanisms, strange notes. But then I found the basement. It's not just a warehouse. It's there. They were doing something. People. There were people here. I found handcuffs, blood, cages. I know how it sounds. But this is not a joke. They hid people here. I stopped the video. My heart was pounding in my throat. The second file. Kevin is back in the frame, but now in the dark. Her voice is quieter, and her breathing is labored. Someone is following me. I heard footsteps. Someone lives here. Or guards. I tried to leave through the main entrance, but he did. It's closed. Not the door, but the whole grate. Someone blocked it from the outside. I'm hiding in the ventilation right now. If they see it, don't come back. Just call someone. The police. Hell, anyone. I heard someone talking on a walkie-talkie. This is not just a forgery. They're watching. The third file was the shortest. The camera drops. Sounds are heard, heavy footsteps, fast, Kevin's heavy breathing, then, scream. Not a long one, but a short one, strangled, as if he had been grabbed by the throat. Then silence. And everything. I was sitting in this dusty room of the mill, staring at the screen, as if his voice could still be heard from there. And I understood that everything I knew about my brother, everything that I considered urban legends, turned out to be part of reality. Tough, ugly. He didn't get here by accident. And maybe I am too. I wasn't looking for an explanation anymore. I was looking for a way out. I collected everything, the camera, the security guard's notebook, his shoe. And he headed for the exit. But when I got to the front door of the mill, I realized it was gone. I didn't hear it close. I didn't hear a click or a bang. It's just like it's never been opened. I looked around. Empty. But the air has changed. It's not a mystery, it's just a fact. It's wetter. Heavier. It was like someone had just walked in and shut the door behind them. I went back to the workshop, trying to find an alternative way out. But instead I found something else. On the table, where the guard's notebook used to be, there was now a note. The paper is fresh. The handwriting is not Kevin's. I stood there clutching this note so tightly that my fingers turned white. The paper was soaked with sweat, and for a second I thought, or maybe it's all someone's elaborate prank. But no. The cold, the heaviness in his chest, and the emptiness in his eyes all spoke volumes. Someone saw me. Someone was watching. And it wasn't a person from the past, but someone who knew that I was here right now. I clenched my teeth, took the note and moved to the very aisle from where I had brought the camera. Now I had no choice. If the exit was closed, I had to look for another one. Ventilation. Basements. Stairs. Anything. Just don't stay in this main workshop. It's too open, too quiet. After returning to that damp tunnel, I continued on my way to where I hadn't gone then. The path narrowed, the ceiling lowered. The rotten smell was getting stronger. I began to hear faint sounds, not footsteps, not voices, but as if the building itself were breathing, the groan of boards, drops, falling dust. Everything here was alive. Alive, not in a mystical sense, but in the most mundane, the present. This place was not abandoned. It was used. And it continues to be used. I went out into the basement. For the first time, a real basement. Not a warehouse. There were cameras here. Not modern, but homemade. Cells welded from rebar. And there are leftovers in each one. Old mattresses, bandages, chains. One lock was fresh, almost not rusty. In the other corner is a bucket of water that has not yet evaporated. Someone was here. Quite recently. I quietly examined the shelves, everything that was there. Map. Drawings. Lots of old photos. People. Men, women. Some with signatures. Dates. Prices? Kilograms? I didn't understand. But one thing was clear, it wasn't a game. These photos were real. Someone was fixing people. Where and when they were spotted. Or, perhaps, where they disappeared. On the back of one photo there was an inscription, "It works." Quiet. Without a family. I shuddered. I put the photo away when I noticed a plastic card in the corner of the drawer, like a pass. Black, with a faded barcode. The number is stamped on top. I took her away, not knowing why. Perhaps it will reveal something that is yet to come. The tunnel led me into a narrow room that looked like an old office. Wardrobe, desk, telephone. I picked up the phone, and there was silence. There's no signal. There is dust on the table, except for one place. Someone was sitting here recently. The monitor is covered with a layer of dirt, but the keyboard is clean. I pressed the power button. A squeak. Silence. He repeated it. The screen flashed. Black and white interface. Login window. After thinking for a couple of seconds, I entered the name from one of the photos. The password is the number from the card. It's gone. A window with 3 items opened. Cameras. Movements. Archive. I clicked Cameras. 4 windows. One thing is the empty workshop where I've just been. The second is the passage I was walking through. And on the screen, me. Right now. With a delay of a couple of seconds. The third is the stairs. Empty. The fourth is the bedroom. Bed. Someone's on it. Alive. Human. Man. On the back. Chained up. It doesn't move. The camera jerked. Another person appeared in the frame. Without a mask. Wearing gloves. He sat down next to her. He put his hand on the chest of the man lying down. I pressed the back button. I selected Movements. The last activity was 12 minutes ago. In the same basement where I was. Someone was walking through the cell right after me. I froze. This man, he knew I was there. And he came right after. I didn't look for it. Just passed through. He knew the way. The last one is the archive. There were audio files. Only one with a label, March, cleaning, do not delete. I turned it on. Whoever finds this is either an idiot or the next one. It's not ghosts, it's work. Money. Product. People think that such places are dying. But they live. Because others are dying. And the more you ask, the less you live. If you're already here, you have an hour. Maybe two. It is better to spend them on output rather than understanding. Understanding comes last. And then the bones. The voice was rough and senile. Not scared. Sure. And I realized, I don't need to know who they are. I need to find a way out. I returned to the tunnel, but now everything seemed different. It was as if space had shifted slightly. Everything was in place, but the way back seemed unfamiliar. I didn't recognize the bricks, the dust lay differently. I walked, checking each step against my memory, until I found myself at the elevator again. It was turned on. A green light was flashing on the panel. There is an open mine below. I didn't think about it. I just stood in it and pressed the button. The elevator slowly went down. Everything was shaking and grinding. The mechanism was old, but it worked. Which means that someone is serving him. The elevator stopped. Darkness. I turned on the flashlight. In front of me is a corridor, but of a completely different type. Metal. Clean walls. Cables. Lamps. Workers. Ventilation. It's as if the other side of the mill is hidden, alive, and working. I walked down the hallway. Silence. No footsteps, no voices. Just the hum of electricity and a draft coming through the pipes. And then I saw him. Kevin. He was sitting with his back to me. On a chair. Shirtless. Hands at your sides. The head is lowered. I said his name. He didn't answer. I came closer. He reached out with his hand out. I touched his shoulder. Heat. He was alive. But he didn't react. Not by touch, not by voice. It's like it's disabled. I bent down and looked at his face. His eyes were open, but his gaze was empty. Without focus. Without awareness. He was looking right through me, as if his mind was somewhere far away, inaccessible. His lips were slightly parted, and his breathing was shallow and shallow. No blood, no bruises. But his whole body looked exhausted, as if he had been here for months instead of days. I whispered his name again, louder. Then he shook it. Nothing. Then I began to inspect the room. It was small, isolated, with one door without a handle on the inside. There are wires hanging from the remote control, an old monitor, and a pair of connectors on the wall. Apparently, he was sitting here all the time, tied to some kind of system. He was being held not physically, but mentally. It was broken inside. Cut off from reality. I went to the door. It opened from the outside. I knocked. Nothing. If I tried it, it was locked. He returned to the console. Some of the wires were pulled out. I tried to put them back in place, something short-circuited, the screen blinked, came to life for a second, and went out. Kevin twitched. I whirled around. He began to slowly raise his head. The eyes are glass. I took a step back. Kevin, it's me. Do you remember me? Silence. Then a barely audible, hoarse voice. Go away. What? Go away, while you can. No. I've come for you. We're leaving together. Do you hear? He shook his head. His lips twitched. You don't understand, the door will open, soon, and then. He didn't finish. A lock clicked somewhere in the wall. I froze. He heard it before I did. He knew what was going to happen. His words are not a threat, not a fear. Warning. The door outside began to creak. I rushed to Kevin, grabbed him by the arms, trying to lift him up. He was like a bag of bones. My legs wouldn't hold up. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. The only thought was to get him out of here, at any cost. The door opened. First, the gap. Light. Then a step. 1 second. I didn't turn around. He pulled Kevin to the opposite wall, groping for at least some kind of passage, an air duct, a hatch, anything. But then I saw an old metal cabinet in the corner. Not closed. It's empty inside, but it's big enough for both of us to fit in. I pushed Kevin in first, climbed in after him, and closed the door, leaving a narrow crack so I could see what was going on. A man came into the room. Tall. All in working order. Without a mask. Without weapons. Just a confident person. He walked over to the chair where Kevin was sitting, and only then realized that Kevin had disappeared. He didn't scream. I didn't start looking. He just stood up, exhaled, and took out his walkie-talkie. The target has been moved. probably not alone. Block the exits. I'll take a look at Sector D. The radio clicked and he went out. Slowly, without fuss. The door closed again. And I heard a key turning outside. We got out of the closet. I'm almost dragging Kevin. He began to come to life a little bit. He began to lean on my shoulders, breathe more often. How long have you been here? I asked when we reached the hallway. I don't know, he croaked. At first it was thought, then it was just dark. Who are they? He paused. People. The most common ones. But they use places where no one is looking. Where everything has been written off for a long time. They don't even have to hide. Just stay invisible. Why did you come here then? He looked at me. His gaze focused for the first time. I was looking for my brother. I didn't say anything. I just squeezed his hand and led him on. The corridor was divided into 3 directions. I chose the middle one. It led down. There was no time to think. Just go. At the end is an old garage. Metal gates. Rust. There is a keyboard panel on the side. Do you have a map? Kevin asked. I took out the one I found in the basement. He took it and ran it over the panel. A click. The gate lifted slightly. It was enough for us to slip through. We were outside. An open space. Old cars overgrown with grass. Storage containers. And the track. Leading to the forest. We'll get you out, I said. He just nodded. We ran. I had so much strength. There was no shouting or pursuit from behind. Just silence. And it was even more frightening. We kept running until the forest became darker and denser. Kevin was breathing heavily, his steps slowing down. I couldn't stop because I knew if we stayed here, we'd get caught again. There could be more than just guards behind us, but something much scarier. The forest stretched to the horizon, but in the darkness I could barely make out the road. I just knew that I had to move. He was exhausted. I felt his hand weaken on mine, as his body became heavy, as if he was losing consciousness. I put him on my shoulder and went deeper into the forest. Hold on, Kevin. We need to move faster. We're almost at the exit, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. It wasn't just fatigue. It was something else, as if he didn't believe salvation was possible. I pulled him out of the undergrowth and into an open space where I could at least see a little bit. There were no roads, no footprints, no people. Just a dull silence, as if everything around us had stopped. Suddenly I stopped. No matter how much I ran, I suddenly realized that we weren't alone. That sound. That quiet, barely audible noise, footsteps approaching. Ignoring Kevin, I turned sharply in the direction of the sound. See. He is the same person. He was standing right at the edge of the forest, watching us intently. He didn't move. He didn't move. I was just watching. Strange. No signs of aggression, but not friendly either. He was wearing the same work suit as before, without a weapon, without reaction. He was just watching. I felt Kevin become even more tense, his body tensed. It was something strange. He knew this man. Or knew who he was. I pulled him along again. We had to leave. But the man didn't move. He just stood there. And while I was pulling Kevin along, I managed to notice how his gaze suddenly became more intense. It was as if this man was ready to stop us. I felt that if I kept going, I was taking a risk. But if we don't move, whoever's with him will catch up with us. Then I understood. It wasn't just a man. It was a symbol. A symbol of everything that happened here. Whoever stayed here, who was watching, knew that Kevin and I weren't the only ones who wanted to escape. This man was just a guard. He knew what was going on in these places. He knew who we were, and he knew we wouldn't leave here. As I continued to stare at him, his figure disappeared into the darkness. And at that moment, I realized that our chances of salvation were very minimal. Kevin suddenly pulled away from my hand, his eyes returned to normal, as if he had regained consciousness. He looked around. "We can't get away," he said. "You have to understand that. All we need to do is go back." I froze. I couldn't believe what Kevin had just said. Go back there? Here? I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I didn't know what he meant. "Do you want to go back there?" I asked, holding my breath. He nodded slowly. And his gaze turned blank again. "I can't go there. They won't leave us alone." I felt something inside me break. But I knew one thing, if I stayed here, I wouldn't be able to help him. I had to choose. I looked at Kevin. His eyes clouded over again, but I knew we couldn't stay here. We had to go back to the place where we came from. I nodded, hoping I could get him back, hoping it wasn't over yet. "Come on." We can still leave. When we returned, everything was not as I remembered. Everything seemed alien. There was no sign of us in the place we had left. The walls were covered with mold, and the air was so heavy that I could feel it pressing down on my chest. It seems that everything we've been through has been nothing more than nonsense. Or, maybe it was part of something bigger? I couldn't figure out what it was. All I knew was that I had to leave. But here's the question that haunts me. What if we're never allowed to leave? What if all these places, these people, these events, they just sit in your head until they catch up with you, make you part of this terrible circle? I looked around. Where are we now? Where is the line that separates us from all this? Who really controls our reality? And so, I stood there, but my head was empty, as if I still hadn't left. Everything kept spinning, and I couldn't stop feeling it. What do you think? Could it be that everything is happening? Write in the comments what you think about it. When I think about that trip, my stomach still clenches. Not from fear, not from horror in the usual sense, but rather from the realization of how easy it is to cross the line beyond which the ordinary becomes irreversible. I just wanted to get out of town then. Autumn dragged on lazily, and everything inside asked for a change of scenery. My friends and I have discussed the idea of camping many times. Nothing special, a tent, a campfire, beer, conversations until dawn. A typical vacation for those who are tired of the noise, but still do not want to stay in complete silence. My name is Alex. I'm 27, and at that time I was working in an advertising agency. Everything went as usual: traffic jams, reports, calls, empty negotiations. The thought of a short trip with friends seemed like a salvation. There were 4 of us: me, Eddie, my college and life roommate, a man who always has a flask and a couple of stories on the verge of truth and lies hidden away; Jason, a bit boring but practical, without whom we would have forgotten both sleeping bags and water; and Michael, the youngest, almost a child in a company with a phone to which he was glued even during trips to the toilet. Where to go was a question to the last. All the popular campgrounds were either busy or boring. We wanted a place without families with children, without guitarists around a nearby campfire. I needed something private. And then, as happens in all bad stories, Eddie said, "Have you heard about the forgotten campground?" He said it as if he knew what would interest us. The abandoned place, an old campground, has not been officially operational since the mid-90s, but it is still on the maps. He found the coordinates on some old forum where someone wrote that he had spent the night there last year. There was almost no road left, and the trail was overgrown. But if you get through, you can find old concrete platforms, rusted trash cans, even shower stalls boarded up with boards. "Is it safe?" Jason asked. "What do you mean, safe?" Eddie grinned. "It's nature. Either you like being closer to the ground, or stay in your office." We got together 2 days later. We loaded sleeping bags, canned food, a gas stove, a lot of water and, of course, beer into the car. We drove in an old SUV that I borrowed from my brother. It was a long road. We drove the last few kilometers on a cracked dirt road, and then we left the car on the side of the road and walked. The trail was barely visible, as if someone had erased it from the map, but it still lived under a layer of moss and dry leaves. When we got to the campsite, the sun was already setting. The place looked like it had been carved out of another time. The rusty arch that had once had the letters of the name on it was now half broken. In some places, lampposts could be seen in the grass. They had been dead for a long time. An old sign with a map of the campsite stood at an angle, and ants were running across the board. On the back, someone had carved "Run while you can" with a knife. We laughed. Like a camping horror story. Eddie even took a picture. We set up tents on a concrete slab that once served as a trailer park. It was cozy. The silence seemed pleasant, and the forest around them was dense but not threatening. We lit a campfire, opened a beer, and began discussing life. Eddie started baiting stories again, Michael was on his phone, Jason was checking the gas level in the tank and making sure we didn't forget anything. Everything went smoothly. I even thought it was the perfect place to reboot. Then it started to get dark. Not abruptly, no. It's just that gradually the colors began to fade, as if someone was slowly removing them from the palette. The air became cool. The campfire crackled, and that was the only sound. No insects chirping, no rustling. I noticed it first. "It's too quiet," I said. "You mean the forest?" Jason looked around. "Yeah. I can't even hear the birds." "Maybe it's the fall," Eddie said. "Or because we're in a place where no idiot has set foot in the last 20 years. We were laughing, but a strange feeling was growing inside. Not fear, just a feeling that something is wrong. We stayed by the campfire until late at night. At one point, Michael said, "I have no connection. Even the navigator doesn't load it." Well, we knew it was the middle of nowhere, I reminded him. Yes, but I even lost time on my phone. He showed the screen, midnight. No date, no signal. Just a black screen and white numbers. We looked at each other, but no one showed that he was uncomfortable. It still seemed like a small thing at the time. Just a glitch. Well, it happens. A light breeze carried a smell like rotten wood. I got up and walked around the perimeter, shining a flashlight. Logs, grass, forgotten urns. In one of them, under a layer of leaves, I saw a corner of a plastic bag. He carefully took it out. There was an old soda bottle inside and a paper envelope. It was darkened and stained, as if someone had held it in dirty hands. On the front is a faded name, Daniel W. I returned to the campfire and showed the guys what I had found. Jason immediately said, "Don't touch it." But I've already opened it. Inside was a note written in ballpoint pen. The handwriting is uneven, as if it was written in a hurry. They went to get water and didn't come back. I waited until sunset. The tent was cut up. There were no footprints. I went down the road. 2 hours later, I realized that I was walking in circles. I do not know if anyone is left. Don't sleep. Don't leave the bonfire. This is not a forest. It's something else. It's fake, Eddie said. Someone just wanted to scare the tourists. There are no tourists here, Michael replied quietly. He was right. We were the only ones here. And, it seems, for a long time. I couldn't explain why it was getting cold inside. It's just that every muscle is tense. The wind picked up again. Something snapped out of the darkness. A branch? A step? It's hard to say. We all fell silent at the same time. And then it started. I remember that moment in detail. We sat in silence, the fire crackled, and something cracked in the darkness. Maybe a deer, maybe a fallen branch, but as soon as you sit in silence, completely detached from civilization, every rustle seems to be something significant. All three of us, me, Jason, Eddie, and even Michael, who usually ignored everything except the screen, froze. We looked into the darkness, but the lanterns did not reach far, only highlighted the wet trunks of trees, the glint of cobwebs hanging on branches, and the dense air between them. Everything seemed to shrink. Probably an animal, Jason finally said, but his voice was uncertain. Yeah, Eddie muttered. Or Michael was munching on his chips too loudly. The laughter was forced. I felt something begin to creep under my skin, not fear, no. More like a hunch. We put more wood on the fire and began to discuss whether it was worth keeping watch at night. It looked stupid, even childish, but still there was a feeling inside that it was necessary, as if you couldn't just lie down and fall asleep. In the end, it was decided that I would stay by the campfire first, and the others would lie down. Jason was supposed to be up in a couple of hours. Eddie muttered something, hiding in his sleeping bag. Michael tossed and turned in the tent for a long time, and I was left alone, staring into the fire. Time passed slowly. I sat and listened to the coals crackle. The wind sometimes passed through the treetops, and the whole forest began to whisper softly. It was a strange sound, like something sliding through the leaves, but not touching the ground. I kept my eyes on the darkness. It seemed that there was someone there, beyond the edge of the world. Not necessarily a person. Simply, somebody. It's like you're standing in front of a mirror and you know that the reflection is suddenly going to do something of its own. At some point, I noticed that the bonfire was going out faster than usual. It's like the firewood burns out instantly. I threw another one, and then I heard it. No, not footsteps. It was like someone had run their fingernails over metal. A long rasp, very quiet, but piercing. I stood up and illuminated the direction from which the sound came. The flashlight fell on a rusty urn. I walked over, and everything was empty. Leaves, wet grass, old bags. Only the lid of the urn was swinging slightly, as if someone had touched it a second ago. I looked back at the tents. Everyone was there. I shouted in a whisper, "Eddie?" Silence. I went back to the campfire and sat down, but I couldn't relax anymore. About 10 minutes later, Jason looked out of the tent. "Is something wrong?" "No. Everything is calm," I lied. He looked at me for a couple of seconds and got out. "I'm going behind the bushes." He left, and I was left alone again. The fire was no longer warm. I was watching the flames dancing, and suddenly I remembered the note. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now certain phrases are etched into my memory. Don't sleep. Don't leave the bonfire. And one more thing, the tent was cut up. It's been about 5 minutes. Jason didn't come back. I thought maybe I'd gone further away. But after another 5 minutes, I started to get nervous. I got up, picked up the flashlight and headed to where it was supposed to be. He illuminated every bush, every stone. I was calling him. Several times. Softly at first, then louder. Jason. Nothing. Just my voice and the wind. I walked about 10 meters further, towards the old shower stall that we had noticed earlier in the day. It was covered in mold, the doors had been torn off, and the pipes were sticking out like rusty needles. There is silence behind it. I pointed the flashlight right inside, and there, against the wall, I saw his backpack. I recognized it by the patch. He always carried it with him, even when he was just going to need it. I moved forward, my heart beating fast. It was damp inside. The floor is covered in dust, there are no footprints. I looked around. The backpack was lying as if it had just been dropped. But there was something nearby. A pack of wet wipes, unpacked, and blood. A small dark spot, almost dried up, but still fresh. I turned around and ran back. When I returned to the camp, everything was different. The bonfire was almost out. The tent where Eddie was sleeping was open. The zipper is broken. It's empty inside. I walked over to Michael's tent. Mike, wake up. Hey. He didn't answer. I pulled the zipper. There's no one inside. The sleeping bag is split open from the side like a knife. I was left alone. Everything was happening so fast that the brain didn't have time to put it all together. I spun around, grabbed the flashlight, threw it, called them, and again nothing. The forest seemed to be looking at me. He didn't attack, he didn't move. I was just waiting. I do not know how much time has passed. Maybe an hour. Maybe 15 minutes. I packed the rest of my things in my backpack, put out the fire as best I could and left. He walked along the path. Back to where we came from. Only the road was already different. It's not that she disappeared, no. It just looked the same. I walked and did not understand how far I had walked, where I was and what was next. Pieces of familiar stumps alternated with new ones. I turned my head, checking to see if I recognized something, and no. I found a rock, the one where we took photos at sunset, and realized that I was walking in circles. I sat down on the ground, opened my backpack, took out a flashlight, and then I saw there was another note in the side pocket. It's crumpled. I didn't put it down. The paper was the same as the first one. The handwriting is different. Rough, as if they were writing in the dark. You're not the first. You won't be the last. No one comes here for nothing. And again, no explanation. No maps. Just these phrases. I tore up the note and threw it into the bushes. I do not know what happened to my friends. I don't know if I was in my right mind when all this was happening. But at that moment, I realized one thing. This campsite was not forgotten because it was old. He was forgotten because someone wanted him not to be remembered. I came out in the early morning. Emaciated, dirty, with cuts on his hands. The car was there, but the keys were gone. I walked along the road, and after a few kilometers a trucker picked me up. I didn't tell him anything. He just kept quiet. He didn't ask either. Apparently, I've seen them before. Later, at home, I checked the forums. Someone deleted the topic with coordinates. The name is Daniel W., it wasn't Googled. The campsite was no longer on the map. Neither old nor new. Not a single photo. It's like he's been crossed out. But I remember. I remember everything. I didn't go back there. Not out of fear, but rather out of the conviction that any return would lead to the same consequences. We still haven't found any friends. I filed reports with the police, told them everything as it was, even tried not to miss the details that sounded strange. They didn't believe me. They said that the guys could have just gotten lost, or maybe there was an accident. One investigator with drooping eyes and a worn notebook looked at me for a long time, as if he was trying to say something, but in the end he simply wrote down, he left the scene himself. According to his testimony, he was disoriented. And everything. I was tested for everything. Alcohol, drugs, even referred to a psychiatrist. I passed all of them. He's clean. But the further the days went, the less I could talk to people. I'm tired of hearing, everything's going to get better. It won't get better. It never gets better when you're the last one out of the woods, and the rest are just, they cease to exist. Mike was found 2 months later. Or what's left of it. Officially, it's an animal attack. But we both know it's not a wolf or a bear. I was there. I saw how it all looked. I recognized him by the pendant he never took off. Eddie disappeared without a trace. No clothes, no footprints, nothing. Jason, his family does not believe in death. Every year they put up a tent in the yard and turn on old recordings from hiking trips. I don't go to them. Can't. A year has passed. Then the second one. I changed the city. I moved to a place where there are fewer forests, less noise, fewer people asking questions. I worked at an auto repair shop. It's a simple job, no talking. You come, you fix, you leave. A day is like a day. Everything was fine until one day I found another note in the glove compartment of someone else's car. Without a name. Without threats. Just one sheet. You think it's over. But you're wrong. You stayed. And that means you're needed. I didn't know who had left it. The car was brought in to replace the brake discs. The owner is a woman in her 50s, polite, silent. I doubt it's her. But from that moment on, everything went differently. It seems to be the same: morning, coffee, noise under the hood, horns, dust. But somewhere inside, this feeling began to spin, as if someone was watching. Not behind my back, no. Otherwise, I would have turned around. Namely, from the inside. It was like I had a passenger inside me. I started to notice repetitions. The same person entered the store opposite at the same time. He always wore a gray windbreaker, always took one bottle of water and went out without paying. I told the seller about it, and he said he hadn't noticed it. The surveillance camera is broken. For the second day in a row. Third. And on the fourth day, this man just stopped and looked at me. He didn't say a word. I just stood there until the pedestrian light came on and walked around the corner. I followed him out, and it was empty. Then I bought a camera. I started writing everything down. Myself. Make way. Even the garage. Not because I was hoping to catch something, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy. The recordings went on for 8 hours, everything was according to plan. But one day, a black frame. There was no one in the place where I was supposed to be sitting. An empty chair. Although I remember exactly how I was sitting. As he spoke into the microphone. How he told his thoughts out loud. The next morning, there was another note. I was just lying at the entrance. They're watching. But not because of you. Because of what you know. I burned it. And immediately regretted it. I should have left the evidence. But everything I did before didn't make sense. These notes are not a trace. These are reminders. To me. Just me. I decided to leave again. This time it's not easy to change the city. But to cross yourself out. Delete social networks. Change the name. I hired a private trader, and he helped me fake everything. I've become different. New apartment, old armchair, minimum light. He lived on cash, no cards, no internet. Just books. Just paper. And silence. I thought I could disappear. But one day, an envelope was put in the mailbox. Tight. Colorless. Without stamps. There are 3 photos inside. The first one shows me sitting in a tent by a campfire. That very evening. We had one camera, and it stayed in the woods. I didn't take it. The second one is Eddie. Sleeping. In the sleeping bag. With a flashlight on his forehead. Someone was filming outside. I'm on the third. But not now. And not then. It shows me standing outside my new apartment, in the clothes I was wearing last night. The photo was taken at night. When I was sleeping. There was a signature at the bottom. Scratched with a needle. You started the story. Now finish playing. I do not know who is behind this. I don't know why. But at some point I realized that everything that was happening was not an accident. Not wild nature. Not a conspiracy. This is someone's game. The meaning of which was my survival. Not a victory, not an answer, not a salvation. Just survival. Every decision I make is already being observed. Each route is remembered. And every time I think I've lost it, I find a new trail. A new eye behind the back. A new envelope. And one day, on the bus, a man sat down next to me. It doesn't stand out in any way. He was silent the whole way. But before leaving, he leaned over to me and whispered, "Do you want to know why you're here?" I didn't say anything. But he smiled and added, "Then go back to where it all started. But not into the woods. Deeper. Much deeper." And he went out. Leaving behind the smell of tobacco and a page of the same paper that started it all. There was only one word written on it. Remember that. I held this page in my hands, sitting on an empty bus, and I couldn't throw it away. The word, remember, cut into my mind like a knife into a tree. You can't erase it. I got off at the first stop, stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at nothing. Cars drove by, people walked by, but it didn't seem to concern me. Not at this moment. Not now. That night, I returned home and took out an old backpack. I pulled out an old map. Not an electronic one, but the paper one with the bold marks, creases, and campfire stains. I ran my finger along the route where we were walking then, and stopped where, according to my recollections, that camp was. An abandoned campground. The map didn't say anything about this place. Not a single designation. Emptiness. I decided to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because otherwise they just wouldn't let me rest. Sometimes there are only two ways left in life: either you go to the end, or you live with a question all your life. And a question is scarier than any answer. Even the most terrible. I didn't tell anyone. I bought a used Jeep, refueled it, took water, flashlights, a sleeping bag and something else. Of what could be called protection, there was only a hunting shovel and a pepper spray. I wasn't going to fight. I just wanted to understand. It started to rain on the way. First a light rain, then a downpour. The asphalt groaned under the wheels, the wipers could not cope. I knew where to go. The road that I once remembered seemed to open up before me. Everything was painfully familiar. The same lapel, the same sign, the lopsided pole and the gravel path that led into the forest. This time, I was alone. No campfire, no talking, no laughing. Just me and the silence. I left the car aside and walked. Every step sounded hollow, like the beating of a drum. The grass was wet, and my shoes were sinking into the mud. I walked forward until I came to the clearing. Everything seemed the same, just silent. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. No bird sang. The leaves didn't rustle. Even the wind stopped. I stood in the center. There was the same ash underfoot. The remains of the campfire. Even the charred edges of the boards that we used as benches remained in place. All except one thing: tents. There were none. I walked around the clearing. I found an old mug. The iron one. The one Jason drank from. Then a torn piece of sleeve. The color is like Mike's jacket. And nearby, almost under the roots of the tree, I noticed a dent in the ground. Rectangular. I took out a spatula. The ground was loose. Wet. I dug without a break. Silently. Calmly. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for, but when the blade hit something hard, I understood. It was a box. Metal, rusty, with a hinged lid. I pulled it out. Opened. There are notes inside. A lot. Wet, but readable. Everything is handwritten. In different handwriting. I took them one by one and read them. There were names. Stories. Events. Someone was losing a brother. Someone's sister. Someone is a whole group of people. Everyone disappeared in this place. Everyone had one thing in common: camping. Old, forgotten, not listed in any map. One of the notes was fresh. My name is written on top. The handwriting is mine. I don't remember writing it, but I definitely recognized my own letters. There were only 2 lines. You're back. Now you know. But only one can leave. I didn't understand. At first. But then I heard a sound, not loud, but sharp. A click. It looks like a shutter. I turned around. There was a man standing at the edge of the clearing. In a gray windbreaker. That's the one. He stared at me, not coming any closer. I raised my hands. Gradually. He showed me that I was unarmed. He stepped forward. Why all this? I asked. What do you want? He didn't say anything. He went to the drawer, looked at the papers, and took out one of them. He unfolded it. He handed it to me. It said, "You didn't survive by accident. I need you to tell me. To warn you. Everyone who knew disappeared. But you have to stay. Until the end." I looked at him, and suddenly I realized that he wasn't threatening. He's guarding. As an archivist. Like a watchman. He didn't do any harm. He just made sure that everything stayed in its place. I nodded. And then he slowly turned around and went into the forest. I was standing alone, among the wet trees, with dozens of other people's stories in my hands, and only one thought rang in my head: now it's my turn. I buried the box back. Tight. It was like he was trying to leave everything inside. I went back to the car. The rain has already stopped. The road back was quiet. Not a single car. Not a single person. When I returned to the city, I didn't talk to anyone. I just sat down at my desk and started writing. That's it. From beginning to end. So that you, who are reading this, know, if one day you come across a map without a mark, if someone suggests a trip to a place where it was fun, do not go. Because forgotten places don't forget you. When my brother Kevin disappeared, The police closed the case 3 weeks later. He had no enemies, debts, or strange habits. He just packed his backpack, refueled the car and left. As he wrote to me in a message, "I'm going to see the old village, the one next to the mill. Then I'll tell you what I found." There was no more word from him. Many people thought that he had simply moved to another city and started a new life. Even the parents accepted it. They had to move on somehow. But I'm not. He wasn't like that. We have traveled together since childhood. He always sent photos, wrote coordinates, and let us know if he spends the night in a tent. This time was different. I started looking for it myself. I rewound his route, collected all the checks from his bank card, and asked people at gas stations. So I came to a small dilapidated settlement, marked on the old map as Dunridge Hollow, a village in a lowland, overgrown, long forgotten. Kevin's last entry on his phone, the coordinates leading there. This village was partially demolished back in the 80s, because of landslides, infrastructure problems, but in fact, because of something that no one really talked about. I found a couple of mentions on the forums of diggers and local historians. It all came down to one thing: it was better not to go there. Especially to the mill. In the photographs, the mill looked creepy even in daylight, a long, elongated brick building that had fallen out in places, with narrow attic windows and an old metal mechanism at the entrance. I didn't believe in the stories. He believed only in facts. And one of them was like this: my brother drove there and disappeared. I rented a pickup truck, took with me a set of tools, a flashlight, a canteen with water, a first aid kit, a change of clothes and a map. There was no asphalt to Dunridge Hollow. I drove the last mile along an overgrown track until I had to leave the car and walk. When I entered the village, I had the feeling that I had entered a strange, alien world. All the houses were dilapidated, as if they had been gnawed by time. Wooden shutters hung down like broken arms, roofs caved in, doors stood wide open. Not a single sound. There weren't even any birds. Just the wind blowing through the boards and blowing dust out of the windows. I found 3 houses where it was still possible to walk across the floor without falling through. One was a former store. I found an old showcase with broken bottles and frames with faded price tags. The second one is residential, with a child's bed and toys covered with dense cobwebs. The third is a house with an attic, which I found. Boot 1. Kevin's shoe. I remembered him. We used to buy them together before going to the national park. I checked it. It had a torn backdrop, like my brother's. There was an aluminum flask nearby, the same one he had on his belt. It was a footprint. I was there. The mill was further away, about a mile from the center of the village, on the outskirts. I got there in the evening. The sun beat through the ragged clouds, turning the sky a rusty red, as if the sky itself was warning them not to come in. But I went. The building was taller than I thought. 4 floors, an old brick building surrounded by a concrete frame, all eaten away by time. The iron doors were smashed down, as if someone or something had knocked them out from the inside. It was empty inside. Quietly. The floor is concrete, with oil stains, as if someone had recently repaired something there. There are old ads on the walls, yellowed and almost unreadable. I made out one of them anyway. Workers are strictly forbidden to stay in the building after sunset. Violations are punishable by dismissal. I felt a chill. Why? Because of an old ad? Because of the empty building? Or is it because I feel like I'm not alone? I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. There were workshops there, broken mechanisms, chains, hooks, tables with iron parts. I walked along the walls, shone a flashlight, nothing. Only rust and scraps of cloth. But in the far corner, I noticed a door that looked like newer. Not new, no, but not as rotten as everything else. There was a small room behind the door, and in it there was a cot, a tin cupboard, and a table. There's a notebook on the table. I opened it. It was the security guard's notebook. The recordings were sparse, but one caught the eye. 3.08, the boy came again. I kept looking at the second press. I said to stay out of it. In the evening, his jacket was left on the hook. I haven't seen it again. 6.08, 3 people came. They said they were looking for my brother. I didn't let her in. I'm tired of it. It's all the same. 9.08, there was a scream again. Below. I didn't go. 12.08, the light was on in the lower shop. I'm not touching it. None of my business. I could feel the sweat sliding down my back. Who wrote this? When? If the 3 came, did it mean that someone else was trying to look for them? Or is it missing too? I went back down and found the stairs leading down. Basement. A narrow concrete staircase with metal railings. Down, down again, until the air changed. Dampness, dust, the smell of old oil and something rotting. I took out a flashlight. There's an empty hallway to the left, and a door to the right. I pushed her. There was a warehouse inside. But not the usual one. There were wooden boxes like coffins. They're open. One with a rusty knife. The second one had blood-stained clothes. Third, I won't describe what was inside. I'll just say it wasn't clothes. And not a tool. It was a man. Or what's left of it. I ran back out, not breathing. He stopped at the wall, tore out his breakfast, and spat, gasping for breath. Then I heard it, sound. Not footsteps. The rattle. Metal on metal. Somewhere up there. I turned off the flashlight and leaned against the wall. He was breathing. Gradually. He hardly breathed. Waited. When the sound was gone, I got up again, not out of curiosity, but because I knew Kevin could be here somewhere. Or at least what's left of it. I slowly climbed back up to the first floor, still feeling the taste of rust and panic in my mouth. The air was thick, as if someone had squeezed all the oxygen out of it, and now they had to share it with dirt, dust, and fear. There is heaviness on my legs, and a pressing hum in my head. I wasn't looking for adventures anymore. I just wanted to understand what happened here and find at least a trace of what was left of my brother. At least that's something. When I returned to the main workshop, I noticed that one of the lifts, which used to lower bags and equipment into the lower compartment, was swaying slightly. Not much, barely perceptible, as if a draft was moving a metal cable. I walked over. Next to it is a control panel, covered in dirt and rusty stains, but with one relatively clean switch. Someone touched it recently. I didn't press it. I was just looking at the elevator, at the oil stains and a strange, brownish liquid on the floor that looked like blood, but dried so much that it was already part of the concrete. I walked around the shop one more time and only then noticed a small door in the wall, boarded up from the outside with a thick wooden board. She stood out, too clean, as if she hadn't touched time. There are deep notches on the board, as if someone was trying to get out from inside. Nails? A tool? I did not know. But the board was held down by two old metal bolts. I took out a screwdriver and started unscrewing it. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, to open or not to open. When the board fell, cold air hit my face. There was a narrow passage behind it, damp, brick, with a ceiling so low that I had to walk bent over. I turned on the flashlight. The floor is earthen. The walls have remnants of insulation and are covered with mold. I walked for about 10 minutes before I found myself in a room the size of a garage. There was a table, two metal chairs, and a camera. The usual black one, like for shooting a blog. The power was dead, but there was a battery inside. I picked her up and took her upstairs. I returned to the car and found an external battery in my backpack. Enabled it. The screen lit up. There were 3 videos. All of them were removed on the last day. I clicked on the first one. Kevin's face is on the screen. He looked exhausted. Selfie videos, poor lighting, but the recognizable mill building is behind. If you're watching this, it means I didn't get out. I came here just out of interest. Everything started out fine, old mechanisms, strange notes. But then I found the basement. It's not just a warehouse. It's there. They were doing something. People. There were people here. I found handcuffs, blood, cages. I know how it sounds. But this is not a joke. They hid people here. I stopped the video. My heart was pounding in my throat. The second file. Kevin is back in the frame, but now in the dark. Her voice is quieter, and her breathing is labored. Someone is following me. I heard footsteps. Someone lives here. Or guards. I tried to leave through the main entrance, but he did. It's closed. Not the door, but the whole grate. Someone blocked it from the outside. I'm hiding in the ventilation right now. If they see it, don't come back. Just call someone. The police. Hell, anyone. I heard someone talking on a walkie-talkie. This is not just a forgery. They're watching. The third file was the shortest. The camera drops. Sounds are heard, heavy footsteps, fast, Kevin's heavy breathing, then, scream. Not a long one, but a short one, strangled, as if he had been grabbed by the throat. Then silence. And everything. I was sitting in this dusty room of the mill, staring at the screen, as if his voice could still be heard from there. And I understood that everything I knew about my brother, everything that I considered urban legends, turned out to be part of reality. Tough, ugly. He didn't get here by accident. And maybe I am too. I wasn't looking for an explanation anymore. I was looking for a way out. I collected everything, the camera, the security guard's notebook, his shoe. And he headed for the exit. But when I got to the front door of the mill, I realized it was gone. I didn't hear it close. I didn't hear a click or a bang. It's just like it's never been opened. I looked around. Empty. But the air has changed. It's not a mystery, it's just a fact. It's wetter. Heavier. It was like someone had just walked in and shut the door behind them. I went back to the workshop, trying to find an alternative way out. But instead I found something else. On the table, where the guard's notebook used to be, there was now a note. The paper is fresh. The handwriting is not Kevin's. I stood there clutching this note so tightly that my fingers turned white. The paper was soaked with sweat, and for a second I thought, or maybe it's all someone's elaborate prank. But no. The cold, the heaviness in his chest, and the emptiness in his eyes all spoke volumes. Someone saw me. Someone was watching. And it wasn't a person from the past, but someone who knew that I was here right now. I clenched my teeth, took the note and moved to the very aisle from where I had brought the camera. Now I had no choice. If the exit was closed, I had to look for another one. Ventilation. Basements. Stairs. Anything. Just don't stay in this main workshop. It's too open, too quiet. After returning to that damp tunnel, I continued on my way to where I hadn't gone then. The path narrowed, the ceiling lowered. The rotten smell was getting stronger. I began to hear faint sounds, not footsteps, not voices, but as if the building itself were breathing, the groan of boards, drops, falling dust. Everything here was alive. Alive, not in a mystical sense, but in the most mundane, the present. This place was not abandoned. It was used. And it continues to be used. I went out into the basement. For the first time, a real basement. Not a warehouse. There were cameras here. Not modern, but homemade. Cells welded from rebar. And there are leftovers in each one. Old mattresses, bandages, chains. One lock was fresh, almost not rusty. In the other corner is a bucket of water that has not yet evaporated. Someone was here. Quite recently. I quietly examined the shelves, everything that was there. Map. Drawings. Lots of old photos. People. Men, women. Some with signatures. Dates. Prices? Kilograms? I didn't understand. But one thing was clear, it wasn't a game. These photos were real. Someone was fixing people. Where and when they were spotted. Or, perhaps, where they disappeared. On the back of one photo there was an inscription, "It works." Quiet. Without a family. I shuddered. I put the photo away when I noticed a plastic card in the corner of the drawer, like a pass. Black, with a faded barcode. The number is stamped on top. I took her away, not knowing why. Perhaps it will reveal something that is yet to come. The tunnel led me into a narrow room that looked like an old office. Wardrobe, desk, telephone. I picked up the phone, and there was silence. There's no signal. There is dust on the table, except for one place. Someone was sitting here recently. The monitor is covered with a layer of dirt, but the keyboard is clean. I pressed the power button. A squeak. Silence. He repeated it. The screen flashed. Black and white interface. Login window. After thinking for a couple of seconds, I entered the name from one of the photos. The password is the number from the card. It's gone. A window with 3 items opened. Cameras. Movements. Archive. I clicked cameras. 4 windows. One thing is the empty workshop where I've just been. The second is the passage I was walking through. And on the screen, me. Right now. With a delay of a couple of seconds. The third is the stairs. Empty. The fourth is the bedroom. Bed. Someone's on it. Alive. Human. Man. On the back. Chained up. It doesn't move. The camera jerked. Another person appeared in the frame. Without a mask. Wearing gloves. He sat down next to her. He put his hand on the chest of the man lying down. I pressed the back button. I selected movements. The last activity was 12 minutes ago. In the same basement where I was. Someone was walking through the cell right after me. I froze. This man, he knew I was there. And he came right after. I didn't look for it. Just passed through. He knew the way. The last one is the archive. There were audio files. Only one with a label, March, cleaning, do not delete. I didn't believe in ghosts. neither in poltergeists, nor in the energy of the past, nor in children's horror stories about cursed places. There was nothing mystical in my life, just numbers, sounds, facts, and a sober view of things. I am a field audio technician. I work with digital and analog systems. I help independent documentary filmmakers and criminologists recover audio data, calls, recordings, evidence. Everything that can be extracted from the sound is my bread. But one day, I received a strange order. It didn't start with a request, but with a hint. A man I worked with a couple of years ago on a court case sent me a short message. Do you want a material that will make your hair stand up? Give me a call. But first, turn on the recording I sent you. Only with headphones on. Just once. The attachment to the letter contained a WAV file, about 12 seconds long. I was sitting in an office on the second floor of a rented building in the state, where half of the windows were not closed, and the wall smelled of old wood and wet plaster. I plugged in my headphones and started recording. Silence. A few seconds. Then a rustle, like the sound of footsteps on gravel. Very clear. Then, it sounded like a child's voice, but he didn't say the words. He seemed to exhale. He didn't sing, he didn't cry, it was simple. He was breathing. Hard, confused, with a kind of desperation. The recording stopped. I listened again, violating the instructions. But then, a day later, I regretted it. A week later, I met with him. His name was Kevin. He was a former criminologist who went into private practice. We were sitting in his van in the parking lot, where he kept old equipment, and he showed me a whole archive of cassettes, discs, and flash drives. It's not a horror story, he said. This is Hollow Creek. The old cemetery, in the east, not far from the county line. No one takes care of him. People whose families left a long time ago are buried there. But the sound. He stayed. I lit a cigarette. I don't smoke, but then I extended my hand. I was uneasy. Not from the story, but from his face. Kevin was dry, cold-blooded, without tantrums. But when he mentioned that area by the western fence, his fingers trembled a little. I agreed. Not for the sake of fear, but for the sake of verification. I had equipment in my arsenal that even the local TV channels didn't have. Digital infrasound recorders, microphones capable of recording at 96 kHz. I packed all this in an old army backpack and drove off. Hollow Creek greeted me not with creaks and howls, but with indifference. The cemetery was old, but not destroyed. The gates were open. No one mowed the grass, but it wasn't too tall. The tombstones have chipped corners, but are quite readable. Dates are from the mid-1800s to the 1960s. The last section, to the west of the main track, turned out to be strangely empty. Fewer tombstones. As if there were more nameless people buried there. I unfolded the equipment. At first, everything went according to protocol. I installed a tripod, checked the power supply, and synchronized the clocks on all my devices. Started recording. The temperature is 14 degrees Celsius. The wind is light, about 2 meters per second, humidity is above normal. Everything was recorded. The recording went smoothly. I set up the recorders at different points, at the central arch, next to a secluded tombstone without a name, and near the very western fence where Kevin asked not to stay longer than 2 hours. I stayed for 3 days. When I got home, the first thing I did was upload all the data to my hard drive. The recording time is almost 4 hours. I listened to them at an accelerated pace, noting only the deviations. Everything was clean. Only at about 2:11 a.m., a sound was recorded on one of the recorders near the western fence, which didn't fit into any frequency I knew. He was too uniform to be an animal. Too muffled to be a voice. And most importantly, it was repeated. I've applied spectral analysis. The shape of the signal resembled breathing. Like that child's voice from the first recording. Only this time it's longer. And with a sharp change in amplitude at 2.4 seconds, as if someone had taken a step. I started coming back. Every night. It was getting worse. Recording after recording, each time I caught more and more sounds. Someone was coming. Someone was breathing heavily. Someone was talking, but not with their tongue. Not in words, but as if imitating speech. I tried to repeat something, not knowing the meaning. I took the thermal imager. On the night of March 23rd to 24th, on the southwestern side, I recorded abnormal heat at ground level. An area with a radius of 2.3 meters was 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding environment. Without a source. Without bodies. I made a video of it. I didn't dare to post it. On the 5th night, I started keeping a diary. Not because he was afraid to forget, but because he began to get confused in his feelings. I stopped sleeping. I dreamed that I was still recording. Even in my sleep, I held the microphone and looked at the fence, at the blackness beyond it. I got up from the pillow and went to the monitor to listen to it. One night, at 3:46, I returned to the car. There was a note on the front seat. "You've had enough." It was handwritten, without a signature. The paper was new, but a little damp, as if it had been held in the hands. I went. But not home. I stayed at a roadside motel, 40 minutes from the cemetery. And he began to merge all the records to an external drive, encrypt them, and duplicate them to the clouds. I knew it wasn't paranormal. It was something, but not supernatural. It didn't disappear. It wasn't hidden. It worked according to the laws. I could calculate the steps. He could measure his breathing. Could track the heat source. It wasn't a spirit. It was behavior. Repetitive. Wrong. I'll show it. All entries. All diagrams. All the results of the analysis. And you will tell me yourself that these are just sounds, coincidences, effects. But one day, when you hear someone trying to speak in your voice at 3 a.m., in a place where there is not a single living soul, you will never turn on your headphones before going to bed. I didn't return home for a few more days. He lived in a motel, ate from a vending machine, slept fitfully, with the TV on, where they endlessly played repeats of news and some old movies. But the notes were still playing in my head. I listened to the fragments, applied filters, cut out the noise, enhanced the depth. And all the same, I heard the same thing, breathing. Footsteps. Words spoken with intonation, but without meaning. Sometimes they sound like my voice. Sometimes it sounds like someone else, but with my accent. I didn't say that. I knew for sure. Kevin called me, but I didn't answer. I knew he wanted to stop me. Maybe he had gone through it himself once and now considered it his duty to warn. Or maybe he was just afraid that I would find out something that he didn't want to know either. All I knew was that there was no turning back. I needed to get back there. The last time. To understand. I arrived in the afternoon. This time, without equipment. Just a voice recorder in my pocket, a regular one with a record button. The sun was in my eyes, but everything seemed dim. The cemetery seemed to have faded. I walked along the same paths, passing by the tombstones, now familiar, as if they had become part of my evenings. I reached the very western side, where the ground seemed a little uneven, and stood there without getting anything. I was just listening. Silence. Just the wind. The rustle of dry grasses. There were no birds. I do not know how long I stood. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe half an hour. But suddenly I heard footsteps. Not behind my back. Not from the side. Right in front of me. There were no footsteps. Simply. The ground was sinking slightly, as if someone had passed by without leaving a trace. I took a step forward and nothing happened. Everything froze. I took out my recorder and turned on the recording. And then, for the first time, I heard a sound that I couldn't explain. Not because he was weird. It was because he was completely familiar. My voice. Clear. Calm. He said 3 words. There is no truth here. But I didn't say them. I turned off the recorder, put it in my pocket, sat down on the edge of an abandoned bench covered with moss and cracks, and just stayed there. Not because I was looking for an answer, but because I felt that I was a part of this story. No longer as a researcher, but as a participant. For the first time in all this series of trips, I was not thinking about the sound, not about the data, not about how it looks on the spectrogram. I thought, who was here before me? Who are these people whose names are barely legible on the stone? Who buried them? Who visited? And why doesn't anyone remember them anymore? I returned home a day later. It took me a while to sort things out. For the first time in a long time, I pulled out of the closet old family photo albums, cassettes on which my father kept records. I wanted to compare the voice, find possible matches, or to understand where these words could even come from. I listened to an old tape recorder where I tried to record a radio program as a teenager. And in the middle is a whispered phrase. In the same voice. There is no truth here. I paused. He sat down on the floor. He put his head on his knees. Then I met Kevin again. He looked different. Not older, but quieter. Take it easy. Are you back? He asked. Yes, I replied. But now I'm not looking for proof. I'm just listening. He nodded, took out a stack of sheets from his inner pocket, and handed them to me. These were transcripts of his old files. Unofficial ones. The ones he made for himself. The same place appeared everywhere. Hollow Creek. Different years. Different people. Some heard whispers. Others recognized the voice of their mother and father, who were no longer alive. But everything, like mine, was not accompanied by visions. There were no entities. Just the sound. Just words torn out of memory, or from the depths where they shouldn't have been. I realized it wasn't about the cemetery. And not even about death. It's about memory. About the traces we leave behind, with our voices, words, and breath. Not on film. In space. In the ground. Something that can save. Not like a ghost, not like magic. Simply, like an echo. Re-recorded on a broken tape recorder. Whether you want to or not, you will also sound one day. It's not a fact that it's where he lived. Not necessarily when it should be. But somewhere, among the damp earth, dry grass, and nameless tombstones, your voice may say something you didn't realize yourself. And someone will hear it. So I started listening. One day, towards autumn, I found myself near that cemetery again, without planning it. I was just driving along the old road, thinking about something else, but suddenly I realized that I had turned the wrong way. Or where it needed to be. I don't believe in fate, but it didn't seem like an accident to me. The car stopped on its own, as if exhaling. In front of me is a familiar fence. A dusty sky, burnt grass, and rustling in the crowns of old elms. Everything looked calm. Too much, actually. I went out without hurrying. Without a voice recorder. Without a backpack. Just the old notes in his jacket pocket, folded in four. I didn't want to fix anything. I just wanted to be there. Not as a witness, not as a hunter of evidence. Just like someone who once heard something that he couldn't explain. He walked slowly. Past familiar tombstones, familiar cracks. He remembered every stone. Some places don't seem to have changed since last year. Others crumbled, as if the shadow of time had finally reached them. I sat down on the same bench. The one with the lopsided, peeling cast iron, where I once recorded those strange sounds. And just watched. Long. At some point, an elderly man sat down next to her. I didn't even notice where it came from. He didn't say hello. He just took an apple out of his pocket, took a bite, chewed, and only then said, "You come here a lot." I nodded. Not because it was true, but rather because inside I was really here all the time. He continued. People think that the cemetery is about death. But it's really more about life. Look at the inscriptions. There's nothing about what happened at the end. Just the names. Sometimes dates. No one writes how a person died. Just who he was. Who they thought he was. I was silent. He finished his cigarette and tapped the ash on the ground. There were a lot of people like you here. They came. They were looking for something. They left with notes, but they still didn't understand. Because the answers are not here. Where is it? I asked. He chuckled. Where there was a voice, there was an answer. And he left. I didn't turn around. He didn't ask for a name. I just stayed where I was, digesting this phrase. When I got home, I took out a box of things from my parents' old house. The one I haven't opened in almost 10 years. It contained letters, magazines, old postcards, and audio cassettes. I turned on one on an old player that was barely working. My father is on the record. He was saying something about work, joking with his mom, and at some point he turned to the microphone. "Son, when you grow up, listen. Not everything you hear will be about you. Sometimes we say things that we don't understand. And then it finds you again. That's how it should be." I froze. Because I didn't remember those words. And I certainly didn't remember him writing down such things. And at that moment, everything became somehow evenly. Not calmly, but clearly. I didn't need any proof. I didn't need to know where the voice in the cemetery was coming from. Because now I realized that wasn't the answer. It was a footprint. A memory that is recorded everywhere, even where we never look. Even into the air. I started traveling to other places. Don't look for sounds, listen. People shared their stories. Someone remembered how Grandma talked to herself in the garden, and the words were almost a prayer. Someone would turn on an old radio station, and suddenly catch a fragment of a phrase spoken in a voice that had been gone for a long time. These fragments did not explain anything. But they were. Like sonic splinters left over from someone's life. I started collecting them. Not for the book. Not for the movie. Simply, in order not to forget. Sometimes I go back to that cemetery. Not for the record. For the sake of silence. For the sake of hearing voices pop up in your head again when you're not straining. Not in a whisper. It's not scary. Just like a light whiff of thought. It's like someone else's speech, which, for some reason, you've always known. And if you stand long enough and don't ask anything, then maybe you'll hear your own voice. Sometimes I think that it all started not from the cemetery, not from the voice on the recording, not from those old trees creaking in silence, but much earlier. Maybe it was back when I first saw my grandfather sitting silently in an old armchair, looking out the window, and seemed to be talking not to anyone, but to the silence itself. He never explained what he was thinking at the time. He just nodded to himself, as if he had heard something important. I didn't realize then that it could be part of something bigger, something that clings to us not with scary shadows, but with simple, almost invisible things: memory, voices, gestures. I kept going to places where people said, "There's something there." No one said exactly what it was. They didn't go into details. They didn't brandish stories. Everything was much quieter. Someone said that they heard the floor creaking at night where there had been no home for a long time. Someone said that something was being rearranged in the attic, even though everything had been empty for a long time. And every time I listened, I wasn't looking for an explanation. I listened as if every sound was not a mystery, but someone's attempt to stay, not to be forgotten, not to disappear. I started carrying an old voice recorder with me, but not in order to analyze the recordings later. Rather, it's a reminder to yourself that sound is important. What's in it is a trace, the smell of the past. Sometimes I turned it on in the most mundane places, by the pond, by the railway bridge, on the bus. And sometimes, after a week, listening again, I would catch myself hearing not the noise of the road, not the wind, not the birds, but intonations. Pieces of conversations. A low-voiced laugh. They weren't messages, just real life, which you don't notice at the moment, and then regret that you didn't listen. One day I met a woman at the rickety porch of an old house in the village. I asked if it was possible to make a couple of recordings, just of nature sounds. She didn't answer right away. Then she just said, "You can. Only if you record how the swing creaks. There, in the backyard. My brother made it. He died when I was 9. But when the wind comes from the field, it swings. And I keep thinking, maybe he's sitting there like he used to. Or maybe the tree just remembers him." I recorded this creak. And saved it. Not as proof of anything. But as a moment. An accidental but important thing. These creaks, footsteps on gravel, the scratching of a branch on glass, it all added up to a whole sound map of what we usually don't take with us. It has become increasingly difficult for me to explain to others what I am doing. People were waiting for stories, waiting for clues. And I only had notes. Only thin, almost weightless evidence. There was nothing to expose, because there was nothing to hide. Everything was on the surface. It's just that no one heard. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I turn on one of the recordings. And I'm sitting here. I'm not analyzing it. I'm not looking for noises. I'm just listening. Because there is no mystery in these sounds. They contain a reminder. About people who are no longer there. About places that will soon disappear. About the things that stand next to us as we walk by, rushing to live. I started typing on an old typewriter. Not texts, but names. Phrases. Clippings from other people's conversations. Just to leave them somewhere outside the head. Like those records. And all this is not a collection. It's a footprint. Not an explanation. Not a ghost. And the thing that won't be there anymore if you don't save it. And maybe that's the real gist of what I've found. Not evidence. And a reason to remember. I wasn't always like this. I used to have a normal face, a normal job, a normal voice. But after what happened in that house, I no longer talk to people, I don't live next to others, and I never, you hear, never enter rooms where the walls can convey even a little something. You don't know what it means to hear walls, do you? No squeaks, no sounds from the neighbors. I'm saying to hear as if someone is breathing from inside the concrete, as if someone is sticking their tongue between the wallpaper and the bricks and whispering in your ear, knowing everything about you. Your fears. Your guilt. Your past. You won't believe me. I understand it. I wouldn't believe it either if I were you. But do you want to know what happens when you hear the walls whispering? Good. Listen carefully. I moved in alone. It was a decision that I didn't think about for a long time. I just packed my things, closed the old apartment, and by evening I was driving in a truck with the seat folded back, with rubber tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I wanted to start from scratch. I had no job, my family hardly contacted me, and the girl I'd been dating for 5 years left me. She said I had become boring and neurotic. Maybe so. It was then that I began to notice something strange about myself, I overreacted to sounds, especially silence. When the room was quiet, I always got up, turned on the faucet, TV, or music. It seemed to me that there was something wrong with that silence. But it doesn't matter. The house I rented was rented for a pittance. It was described as spacious, old-fashioned, with thick brick walls and wooden floors. The owner was a typical old man with swollen fingers and a cigarette in his mouth. He sounded like a man with nothing to lose. Very. Too much, actually. But you need it, right? I nodded then. Of course, I wanted silence. But not like that. For the first week, everything was normal. I unpacked, put furniture on, slept on an air mattress, ate food from a can, and read old articles on the internet about house restoration. There were creaks, that's understandable. Old wood, thermal expansion, roof. But then other sounds began to appear. They were almost invisible. It's like someone is just moving. It's like nails touching the inside of a wall. I got up, listened, touched the plaster. Nothing. But one day I caught a phrase. It was muffled, as if from a basement, but very clear. You pretended to forget. But you remember, right? I pulled away from the wall and stared at her. It took me a moment to realize that it was my voice, only fainter, as if I'd said it 15 years ago. But I didn't tell anyone about it. Not out loud. From that moment on, I started writing everything down. I have a notebook. If not, it was. I threw it out later, when everything reached its peak. There were notes on what time I heard what words. Here's one of the pages. I've memorized it. 2213, the wall behind the refrigerator. Someone is calling my name. In my voice, but younger. He says, then why did you run away? 041, bedroom. The crying of a child. Very quiet. I live alone. No children. Did I start to lose my mind? Maybe. But then I decided to check what was behind the walls. I brought a hammer, tore out a board in the kitchen. There was a void behind the plaster, an old ventilation shaft, sealed on both sides. I thought maybe it was all about her. But it was empty. Then the reaction started. Not just sounds. The walls began to respond. I remember once I screamed, "Stop it!" And in response, I heard someone laugh softly, and this laughter came from all sides, from every surface. It didn't get stronger, on the contrary, it became closer, more intimate. I haven't slept in 3 nights. I was sitting in the bathroom with the shower on, headphones on, and a pillow on my head. The sounds didn't stop. Sometimes, at the seams between the tiles, it seemed to me that someone was breathing. Not the wind, not the pipe. It is the breathing, human, slightly rapid. Then I called a noise insulation specialist. He arrived, walked around with a microphone, with a device. And he told me, there is absolute silence here. Too much. You know, it's weird. In such old houses, sound should be heard. And here? It's like everything is being absorbed. It's like you have silencers in the walls. I asked if it was possible that someone had set up acoustic traps. He shrugged his shoulders. In theory, yes. But why? Why would anyone want this house to be so quiet that any sounds in it are your own? I did not know. But after his visit, the walls began to talk more often. Not just in a whisper. Sometimes they talked as if someone was standing next to me, but I couldn't see him. Sometimes it's as if someone is inside my skull and his voice is reflected from the inside of my brain. One day I woke up and found that on one of the walls, on the fogged glass of the window, it says, "Why were you silent?" I didn't write it. But I knew what it was about. I knew it. It had to do with something I did when I was 16 that it took me a moment to realize how far things had gone. This realization does not come abruptly, but gradually, as when you are sitting in a tub of warm water, and then suddenly you notice that the water is already icy, and you are trembling. That's how I realized that the house no longer just whispers, it changes me. It wasn't the walls, it wasn't the air, I was the one who started behaving differently. I stopped calling anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I felt that if I said even one word out loud, the walls would start talking more often. They seem to be waiting. They're waiting for me to say something I haven't said before. Something that I once decided to bury forever in myself. I began to walk slowly, almost noiselessly, even in my own kitchen. He didn't slam the door, he closed it with his hand, making sure that even the lock didn't click. Everything was happening in a kind of oppressive inner emptiness. I had a feeling that you can't make a sound in this house. Not out of fear, but out of some kind of perverted respect. It was as if the walls lived by their own rules, and I had to obey. Not because of magic, but because he was really starting to feel like a stranger. One day I went outside, just to keep from going crazy. I was standing, looking at the windows of the house, and it seemed to me that I saw my reflection in each window at the same time. My movements. My head turned. Everything was exactly repeated in every glass. Except that I didn't move in one of the windows. I was just standing there. He looked at himself. I couldn't explain it. I came closer, squinted, but everything returned to normal. Just a trick of the light. Probably. From that day on, I began to notice one thing that was killing me: the house was listening. I realized this when, out of habit, I started reading aloud from an old newspaper, just to occupy my voice. I reread paragraph after paragraph. And when I said, according to the police, the body was found 3 weeks after the disappearance, the wall quietly exhaled. You weren't found then. I dropped the newspaper. And exhaled for the first time all day. It became clear that Dom wasn't just listening, he was comparing, analyzing, responding. Not in some mystical way. It's as if you started creating these answers yourself, as if you locked yourself in isolation for months and your brain started giving back everything you were trying to hide. I remember sitting in the pantry, staring at the concrete. I tried to talk to the walls. He asked them what they wanted. Why are they repeating my past? Why do they remember not just facts, but moments that I have never told anyone? They didn't respond with words. Just a whisper, a breath. The feeling that someone was here when I was doing something bad. When I was standing over the body of a guy who fell off a cliff. Not because I pushed him. No. I was just standing there. Watched. He didn't offer his hand. And then he left. He left as if nothing had happened. And he never told anyone. It was the very silence that I chose then. Now she's back. Only she started talking. It's the same thing every night. There is breathing in the bathroom. There's a voice in the bedroom, whispering, "Did you think it would just disappear?" There are quiet footsteps in the kitchen. Dust was pouring out of the sockets. There is a scratching sound in the living room, as if someone is running their nails along the wall from inside, but only once. And stops. Doesn't try to get out. It just lets you know he's there. I didn't sleep anymore. I rarely ate. My stomach was cramping, but I didn't want to leave the house. Paradoxically, the scarier it got, the harder it was to leave. It seemed to me that if I went out, I would take it with me. These sounds. These phrases. That whispering rhythm. He's in my head. And it won't stop at another address. Because now I knew it wasn't in the walls. It's in me. It's me. I am that voice. I am these whispers. On the 5th day without sleep, I heard something new. Something that wasn't there before. It was not a voice. And the sound is like someone moving papers. Dry, on the surface. I followed the sound, barely standing on my feet, and there was a piece of paper on the floor in the hallway that hadn't been there before. There was a printed text on it. I didn't recognize the font, but I knew for sure that it was written about me. About that night. About how I stood there, how I looked down, how I took a step back without saying anything and left, leaving the body below. Every detail. Even that I didn't want to leave, but I did. Because he was scared. Because he was a weakling. I wanted to burn the sheet, but as soon as I brought the lighter, the wall next to my shoulder groaned softly. I recoiled. No, it's not pain. It was a complaint. It was like she was saying, "Don't. Let everything stay." And I realized, this house is not a trap. This is the place where you face the truth. My own. He's not making anything up. He only repeats what you yourself once decided to bury. He doesn't punish. He makes you remember. You ask, what happens when you hear whispering walls? What's happening is that you can never pretend to be a good person anymore. You can live, eat, breathe, but inside you know, you've heard yourself. The way you really are. And now you're living with it. I didn't get out. But not because he couldn't. But because he didn't want to. For the first few weeks, I was still trying to fight. I wiped the mirror so that I wouldn't see my reflection, not the one you're looking at, but the one that's looking at you. I tried to behave like before. I brewed coffee, turned on the TV in the background, even opened the windows. He did everything to regain his normalcy. But the problem wasn't in the house. Not in the sounds. The thing is, everything I did was fake. I could feel it. Clearly, distinctly. Every action is like trying to wash your hands dirty with something that won't wash off. I started noticing things that didn't matter before. The plastic from the lid of the water bottle, which creaked like the very branch that I stepped on the slope that night. The metallic clatter of a spoon against a cup, which reminded him of hitting the back of his head on a rock. Even the tap water, when it flowed intermittently, sounded like his breathing, his last breaths. It wasn't a whisper, it was just a reminder. I'm not crazy. I've probably even become clearer. Because for the first time in a long time, I lived in complete silence, where every memory was real. No excuses. Without telling your friends how it happened. No one asked questions here. No one accused. Just walls that were just waiting for me to stop lying to myself. One day, I decided, I need to finish. Not life. Not a house. And a game of silence. I took the paper and started writing. Without headlines. Without structure. It's just the way it was. Everything that happened that night. How I saw him climb onto the ledge, how I didn't say anything, even though I knew it was a risk. How I stood when he stumbled. How could I grab him? But he didn't. Just because I felt inside, let him fall. Because then it's all over. Quarrels, debts, resentments. And I will no longer blame myself for getting tired of dragging it out. I've written everything. Every detail. Every disgusting, cowardly moment. I wrote about how I stood in the dark, listened to the silence, and walked home without looking back. I wasn't going to show it to anyone. I put the sheet in the same storage room where I first heard breathing. He just left it. I put a heavy lantern on top. And he went to sleep. From that night on, the walls no longer whispered. Not a single sound. But not because I got rid of them. No. Simply. They had nothing more to say. I said it all myself. Everything I was afraid of. Everything he buried. Everything he hid behind this house, behind his manners, over coffee, and talking about the weather. Now I am silence. I became this house. I didn't leave. I hadn't even thought about it. I wake up, walk around the rooms, sometimes I read that note. And sometimes I just sit in silence, listening, not to the walls, but to myself. To what I've become. Because if you've heard the walls whisper the truth to you, you can't go back to a life where you're a good person.